Okay. Well, we're excited to be here. We have our planning commissioners live with us here in the Encinitas City Council chambers. I said hello to everybody, but Steve hadn't quite come in, so good to see you, Steve, in the flesh. This is the special joint meeting of the Encinitas City Council and Planning Commission. It is Wednesday, March 9, 2022, just a bit after 4:30 p.m. May we please have a roll call?
Yes, I'll start with the Planning Commissioner. Planning Commission, Commissioner Sherrod. Okay, Commissioner Ryan. Here. Mr. President. Commissioner Dalton.
Here.
Vice Chair Doyle.
Here.
Chair Ehlers.
Here.
Is here. And then we'll go to City Council. Councilmember Hinsey.
Here.
Councilmember Kranz.
Here.
Councilmember Lyons.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Mosca.
Here.
Mayor Blakespear.
Here.
Record will show that all members of the City Council and the Planning Commission are present.
Okay. We have one item on our agenda. It is the City Council and Planning Commission discussion regarding the development of objective design and development regulations for urban lot splits and 2-unit residential development in single-family zones as allowed under Senate Bill 9. So I presume we'll have a staff report from Jennifer Gates. Hello, welcome. And I'd just like to ask the City Clerk, how many public comments do we have?
We have one at this time.
Okay, thank you. I think you might have a button there to turn it on, do you? No?
Am I on? Yes, I am on now. Can you put my PowerPoint up, please? Thank you. I'm not used to being down here, not having control. I know, I'm like, I can't even turn on my mic. All right, well, thank you. Okay, we'll start all over again. Jennifer Gates, Planning Manager. Thank you. Today we are going to present on SB9. So Mayor, City Council, and Planning Commissioners, we wanted to have this joint meeting to have this discussion together as we develop this ordinance amendment to implement SB9. So I'm going to for the benefit of Planning Commission and also just a refresher for City Council, I am going to go through some of the slides that we presented previously in November of last year and then get into the meat of our discussion today. So just for the history again, so SB9 was approved on September 2021 and it became effective January 1st of this year. And what it does is it adds new sections to our laws, including the ministerial approval of qualifying 2-unit development within all single-family residential zones, as well as in our Subdivision Map Act, it adds the ministerial approval of a parcel map for a qualified urban lot split, again within single-family residential zones. Also amends the government code to modify the timing of map extensions and expirations. So on November 17th, staff presented to City Council an informational presentation. And then on December 15th, City Council adopted an urgency ordinance, and this was to provide clarifying portions to the state law to implement it because it was going into effect on January 1st. And then this was extended through December 15th of 2022 by City Council. So relation to other laws, so in this state law, CEQA actually does not apply to any duplex approvals or 2-unit developments or urban lot splits. It also doesn't apply to any ordinances that implement these provisions that we develop. The Coastal Act does apply, but under SB9, no public hearings can be held for these applications. So just to qualify that, coastal development permits that are within our coastal zone or appealable area of our coastal zone will have the ability to appeal to the Coastal Commission, but there is no appeal ability to actual City Council, as there normally would have been. In addition, the Housing Crisis Act does still apply, and any local implementing ordinances cannot reduce the intensity or density of land use. So this includes reductions in heights, lot coverage, FAR, open space, et cetera. And then also, all these permits are subject to our Permit Streamlining Act. Oops. Sensitive. Okay. So what projects qualify for 2-unit development in our urban lot split are our single-family residential zoned properties. So these are the zones that are identified that only allow single-family development today. So also parcels must meet location requirements, and so they've been outlined here. So a property cannot be located in any of the following that you see on this slide, but it can, and it also cannot be in the other list. However, specified requirements can be met. So in the very high fire hazard safety zone, which I know is a concern to this community, as long as it meets the fire code and any building code, then you could potentially do an urban lot split within that and those zones. And the reason why I'm saying that is because when you look at the next image, which is our map. So the map is showing you all in color, all of the zones within the city of Encinitas that are single family. So these are all colored. Then also what you're seeing is highlights of areas that have a 100-year floodplain or a floodway, and then the red hatch is the very high fire hazard severity zone. And then we also have natural sensitivities. It's because you cannot do any of these types of projects within habitat areas. And I think primarily the reason why is because there is no CEQA. So for the, there we go. Continuation of what projects would qualify. So the site cannot be a historic landmark, and it cannot be located in historic district, state or local. We do not currently have any historic districts within the city. The project would not alter or demolish any deed-restricted affordable housing, any rent-controlled housing, housing that is invoked by the Ellis Act, which is basically was a rental property and is now going through the process of not being a rental property, and then housing occupied by a tenant within the last 3 years. The project also would not demolish more than 25% of existing exterior walls unless the city determines that they would like to allow this, or that the site has not been occupied by a tenant. So for the urban lot split, all the requirements under the 2-unit residential development section would still apply. In addition, for lot splits, you have approximately equal size lots that are allowed, but a 60-40 max. Each new lot has to be at least 1,200 square feet, so this is 2,400 square feet. The lot split could not have been established through a prior SB9 lot split, so you can't continually subdivide the lot to get down to the 1,200 square feet. And neither the owner nor any person acting in concert has previously subdivided an adjacent parcel with an SB9 lot split. So the urgency ordinance that was adopted in December provided definitions that weren't provided in our state law, and those included what is adjacent, what is a ministerial action, what is acting in concert, and common ownerships. These are the terms that are used in the state law. And then also identified the number of units that would be allowed. So currently no more than 2 primary residential units are going to be allowed per lot. These are the single-family homes. The units may be incorporated within an existing unit or an accessory building, or increase their size. They can be attached, they can be detached. 1 ADU will be allowed per primary unit on the lot. And then parcels that actually propose to do an urban lot split and a 2-unit residential development, ADUs will be permitted, but all objective standards need to be met in order to allow that. In addition, the urgency ordinance has a few development and design standards. So the SB9 projects would comply with all of our objective zoning, subdivision, and design standards that are within all of our policy documents. And then also, if a single-family zone property would not allow for an 800 square foot single-family or 2 800 square foot single-family units with our current development standards, then we would allow for the 4-foot rear and side yard setbacks as identified by the state law. And then in addition, 1 parking space is required per unit unless it's located within a half mile of walking distance of a high-quality transit corridor. We do not currently have shared parking, but that is the other option. And this, by the way, is only our transit center right here down the street. So for policy considerations, what standards may be applied for 2-unit residential development? Allowing of ADUs and junior ADUs is not restricted. So we do allow them, but you can only do 4 units per lot. The rear and side setbacks are a maximum of 4 feet. We cannot require more than that. And then require a maximum of 1 parking space per unit. You can do less, but you cannot require more. And then what standards cannot be applied? Again, any standards that would limit the development of the site to less than 2 800 square foot units. So what standards can apply to urban lot splits? We can require easements for public services and facilities. These are like our gas lines, water lines, electrical lines. Require access or to provide access to the public right-of-way. So if there's a lot split and it creates a lot behind an existing lot that faces the street, we would have an access easement to provide the driveway. And then also to allow more than 2 units on any parcel through that urban lot split. So these are the additional ADUs and junior ADUs. So up to then a new created lot, each parcel would have 4 units, 2 primary and potentially 2 ADUs if it met all the development standards. So what standards cannot be applied to urban lot splits is to impose regulations that require the right-of-way dedications or the construction of off-site improvements. Also, we cannot impose any owner occupancy standards, and we cannot require the correction of any non-conforming zoning conditions. So all existing setbacks for existing structures will still remain. We cannot require them to correct those. So some of the discussion topics that we highlighted, which there may be others that you would like to talk about today, are in the staff report. So to start with, we wanted to talk about ADUs and junior ADUs. So in the urgency ordinance, as I previously discussed, we allow 1 ADU per primary unit. And then they would meet the municipal code ADU standards. On parcels that propose both the 2-unit and an urban lot split, the ADUs will only be permitted if the objective standards are met. The proposed change currently for consideration would be to limit size of the ADUs to the 800 square feet, add affordable housing requirement for ADUs and others that you would like to discuss. So for development standards, the SB9 projects must comply with all of our objective standards that we currently have. The side and rear setbacks may be reduced to 4 feet for 1-story buildings, and then under 16 feet in height if needed to obtain that 800 square foot single-family units. Currently, the proposed change is to add a detached main building separation of 6 feet to any other main building or accessory building. And then again, others. For the subdivision requirements, we currently require vehicular access to the public street. That would then meet all of our existing standards, and that the driveway cannot be shared by more than 2 lots. And then also that all easements that are required for the public services and facilities would be dedicated and conveyed. And then in addition, proposed changes is to clarify that all easements shall be shown on that parcel map, including any public utilities to serve each lot, as well as our drainage easements, et cetera. And then for the application requirements, we do require a ministerial approval of a coastal development permit if it's located within our coastal zone, a design review permit for the construction of 2 units or more, requires a ministerial approval of a parcel map if proposing the urban lot split, and then all approvals will be ministerial under purview of the Development Services Director or his or her designee. The proposed change currently is to add a requirement that all the permits would be submitted concurrently with a parcel map application for an urban lot split. And this is because there's certain requirements if they are doing a 2-unit and an urban lot split that would apply. That wouldn't normally apply if they were just doing a 2-unit development. So we want to make sure that the projects are staying together. All right, and that concludes staff's presentation. If there's other questions that you have, I am available, we're all available to answer them.
Okay, thank you. Did you have a slide that shows your recommendations so that we could be able to discuss them as a group?
I have them just by topic, but I can put them together.
Okay, well, we'll go through that. I'm going to call on the public speaker first.
Gerald Ann Kessler.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
That was depressing. I would like to speak about the environmental potential SB 910 housing project on Melba Road that is slated to take down a grove of mature Tory pines, 173 trees, 30 smaller trees and native shrubs, along with demoing a beautiful historical home built in 1938, all based on the ill-fated density bonus law. AB 2345, or this SB 910. We recently received several more documents from the city about this potential density bonus nightmare project and found once again it's filled with inaccurate information. My main concern is the tree count not being accurate, the drainage and hydrology, which will be sending the runoff into Ocean Nose Canyon, and lastly, and most important, is the historical and cultural reports finding. As I said before, they did not go back far enough on the history of this valuable piece of property. They only went back to the 50s or later. We also learned that there are 3 homes that not just one of on the property built in 1938. We are learning that the buildings may in fact be possible grow houses that were used in agricultural in the 1930s and 40s to house the workers. I also learned that there are some cultural concerns from the local Native American tribes of the Rincon and the Viejas Kumai Indians. They reviewed the proposed project, and at this time, they determined that the project site has cultural and significance ties to the Kumai Nation. I just want to again point out how valuable this piece of property is to the agricultural history of Encinitas, and I would like Tory Pacific and their consultants to do their due diligence and investigate the significance of the last beautiful historical home and property left in Encinitas. Please support the community in acquiring this sacred property from the Staver Trust and use this for open space, tapping into soft green infrastructure funding from the federal or state, which aligns with the Encinitas Climate Action Plan. Thank you for listening.
We do have one more speaker, Glenn OGrady.
Okay, thank you.
Hi. Glenn O'Grady, Lucadia. Just a question. I was hoping it might come out that I was trying to figure out, a lot of houses in Encinitas, especially down in Cardiff, are sitting on multiple lots. It may be a single assessor parcel, but they're sitting on multiple legal lots, and especially down in Cardiff where those legal lots are small, like around 2,500 square feet. And my question is, does this affect down there where they can take a current small lot and further subdivide it? So, I mean, we've seen a number of twin homes come in where they take the existing house off the multiple lots and then put a twin home next to each other on each lot without doing any splits. But does this allow a developer to go further? In essence, say if there's an existing parcel that may or may not have a house on it, but I know there are some down there in Cardiff that don't, can they now put four units on what is considered most people consider a single parcel, but in effect, it's separate legal lots down there. And there are others around the city that are like that. Most of those parcels aren't as small. So I was trying to figure out if we may be unique in that sense where a lot of homes are taking multiple legal lots, even though the assessor considers them a single parcel. So I was trying to clarify that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to the two public commenters, and let's ask staff to respond to our former planning commissioner O'Grady's question about if there was a home that was on a lot that was, or on multiple lots, how would that be managed?
Hey, Council, Royce Powell, Development Services Director. The SB9 talks about existing parcels. So, so that's one. And then two, it only applies to single-family zone properties. So most of Cardiff properties are either R11 or higher. So most of Cardiff most likely won't qualify or be able to utilize SB9. So any parcel that is R11 or less would be subject to SB9. And if that is the case, then if they are existing lots, then they would qualify for SB9, and they can subdivide, but it'll be subject to the standard of 1,200 square foot minimum. So
Right, so the actual existing house doesn't affect it, because what you're talking about are lots, not where the existing house is located on the lot.
yes,
Right.
typically the scenario right now, or that you'll find in Cardiff, is an existing single family that crosses over two parcels. So in order for that property or owner to invoke SB9, that they would have to demo the existing home and then apply SB9 on the two existing underlying legal lots.
Okay, thank you. Sure. Okay, so I think the goal of tonight is that the council will give direction together, taking into consideration the comments of the Planning Commission, and we'll give direction to staff, and staff will bring something back to Planning Commission, which will then come back to us. So ideally, we all have a sense of where the council wants to go on this, so we don't get at cross purposes in terms of the Planning Commission going in a different direction than what the council's hoping to accomplish. And also staff would be able to hear the questions in advance that we might come up, so that this would be more efficient. So given that there are 10 of us, what I'd like to do is call on the council to ask any questions or comments they might have initially, if they want to, and then go to each of you. So I'll call on each of you in order to make any comments or questions that you would like, and then we'll come back to council for further discussion of that. So we'll start with Deputy Mayor Mosca.
Well, thank you, Madam Mayor. So I'll keep my questions just kind of really initial and not comments. So I'll reserve any comments to after the Planning Commission has made some of their comments. Thank you, Jennifer Gates and Roy and the whole team for what you've done so far with this law and the urgency ordinance and what we're doing right now. So just a few questions. So the short-term rental, something that we care about and that we've been looking at. I know under SB9, the units that would be produced vis-a-vis SB9 cannot be short-term rentals in the future. So do we have a process to ensure that these are going to be tracked and that they're not going to turn into short-term rentals in the future?
Yes, the permit itself is going to be an SB9 permit, and there'll be a recorded covenant on every property with the restrictions.
All right. And does that also apply to any kind of ADUs or junior ADUs that would be permitted if we permit those that are adjacent to or attached to these units?
That is correct.
All right. And then can we go back to that map that you put up? I think that's a good map. I haven't seen that map before. It looks like one that was just crafted. And so for all of these areas that you've highlighted, and of particular importance to me are the high wildfire areas. So just clarify for me once again, what does this mean? What's the significance of this? So are you saying that one cannot apply for SB9 incentives here in these areas, or that they have to go through some sort of heightened scrutiny or something other than if you were highlighted on this map?
It would be a higher scrutiny to make sure that they're meeting all of the fire standards of being located in a very high fire zone.
All right, because I thought that under the legislation that you could not use SB9 lot splitting in high wildfire areas, but you're saying that you can, but there's more that you have to do. And so what is the additional stuff? You'll provide us that?
I will work more closely with the fire department to lay it out. But as I understand, the city has adopted the code, the fire code, as related to very high fire to allow development currently. And so those rules would apply still for a 2-unit development.
All right, so I think it should be clear on what the heightened scrutiny is in these areas because of high wildfire areas. Because I would imagine that, more housing units and more denser housing units would be more of a fire risk than single-family homes or open space. And so I think that I'd like to understand what the objective standards would be for those. And those are my initial questions.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Kranz.
Thanks. This is one of those issues that has been the subject of a lot of, I guess you might call it hyperbole. There's a lot of fear about what's going to be created in neighborhoods with this particular law. And we have seen drawings of the impacts with many developments on a single-family lot and height and multiple single-family lots that will be converted. So the impacts on neighborhoods could be significant according to the illustrations that I've seen. I would have really, I'm a visual guy, so having illustrations of the issues related to setbacks would have been very helpful for me, because as you were talking about setbacks, you mentioned rear and side setbacks and 4 feet. And so I want to be clear, does that mean both side setbacks are 4 feet and the rear yard setback is 4? Or do we have the same situation where we currently have, for public safety, for firefighting purposes, we have a larger setback required on one side than the other?
So as far as building and fire safety, if the building official does say that for safety purposes that something else would be required, that would supersede this, is my understanding. However, it is 4 feet for side and rear setback.
So
Both sides.
then the question comes up, who gets to define what is the rear yard? So for example, on lots in my neighborhood, many are 80 feet wide by 220 feet deep. So the more logical subdivision is going to be an 80 by 110 foot lot. But one of those lots is going to be in the back. Can the developer decide how the house is going to be oriented to determine what's rear and what's front yard?
The rear and front yard is defined within our zoning code under definitions, and so it would have to meet our standards for which one was rear, which were sides and
So,
front.
and that's true of the unit that would be in the back as well?
It's treated now for flag lots.
Okay. And when do you think you will have some drawings that can give an indication of how splits might be done and what the primary units would look like and how you might be able to orient a ADU for each of the bigger units? When do you think that those will be available? I assume it has something to do with the outcome of our conversation.
Yeah, it will, the outcome of the conversation, and when I present for the first time to Planning Commission, unless there's a request for another joint session, then I would present to the Planning Commission at that first hearing, which is typically a study session.
Some drawings that would say, here are some scenarios that, would be possible. Here's maximum unit size on a lot this size and how ADUs might be laid out. Okay, and I do think that, our current ordinance for ADUs is definitely inappropriate in these situations, that we do need to downsize the size of the ADUs. I know in my neighborhood, those 80 by 220 foot lots many have been subdivided into 3 parcels with 2-story homes on each parcel. And so there is some, while those are all single family residential, this notion of duplex, I don't think is, going to significantly change my neighborhood, as long as it's not a significant number of lots that end up developed in that way. I live next door to a duplex. I think I've mentioned it recently sold for $3.1 million. These are not going to be affordable homes in my neighborhood. So, I think that's probably the most frustrating part of this, is that somebody's going to probably make some really good money on this. And, while there are folks who say that just build and it'll bring the prices down, I think the affordability of housing in our community, that genie is out of the bottle, and it's been going through the roof. And I don't think we're going to be able to use duplexes to try and bring that back down. But ultimately, we're going to have to see how it unfolds. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Lyons.
I just have a couple questions for clarification. I see that on the map, I'm happy to see the map as well, that we have a natural sensitivity area. It's the cross hatch with green. And I'm just wondering if that captures all of our identified habitat areas. I believe I was reading in the, well, you stated that habitat areas are part of the area that is restricted, and I believe I was reading something about it. It needs to demonstrate there's threatened or endangered species there. I have some questions, and maybe it's because of the scale of the map that perhaps we haven't captured all those areas quite yet.
So the city does have an overlay and that identifies special study areas, and some of those special studies include habitat. And so that overlay would be looked at for all of these lots to see if they do have already triggering that special study, and so that we would be able to look at that to see if they are a habitat and see if they have any protected species. So then they would not be able to apply.
Okay. Do you feel that the map as it's shown right now does capture all those habitat areas, or it's kind of maybe there might be a few that aren't?
Yeah, it is site specific, so we would look up each parcel individually and closer, like you said.
Okay.
So if you go online,
I get that.
we go to a parcel, it tells us what the zoning is and if there's an overlay for
Yes.
special studies.
Okay. I was kind of looking at it with that finer lens. One thing I wanted to just clarify, I understand that we can't request off-site improvements. I'm assuming that means beyond what's required for the development. If they need a larger size water meter or something like that because of the development, that's, I'm just trying to think under what circumstances would adding units kick in the need for off-site improvements? And I'm wondering if that's a gray area we need to talk about.
They'll correct me if I'm wrong, but sometimes it's a right-of-way dedication to get the full width of our right-of-way and or a parking space for the public or a sidewalk, so those public type uses in which we need a right-of-way dedication. So we can't ask for that dedication.
So that's a hard stop. That's not something we can do anything about. Okay. I think that's something we should consider when we're looking at these as far as what we're obligated to then for infrastructure associated with when we have higher density in some areas. But I understand you're saying it's not something that we can deal with as a part of how we're modifying our language with SB9. I have two more comments. One is I don't see mention of stormwater, and I think about these developments as increasing the impermeability of sites. Could we address this in how, in our language, in what our expectations are? I'm seeing some nods. Because not only is it a drainage challenge, but it's kind of the green infrastructure of our community challenge. We want to maintain permeability of spaces, and if we have some requirements we can place on this that don't push us outside of what we can do, but still maintain permeability and get the stormwater to infiltrate, I think that's a bonus.
I think we can look at our open space requirements and modify those. Mm-hmm.
I find that stormwater is one of our biggest challenges in our community, and how we manage it and how we do it environmentally well. So my last comment is, you talked about affordable units. I'm curious to hear further, and with other people's input, what their thoughts are on affordable units. And I was wondering if at one point we talked about some incentives for creating affordable units as a part of this process. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I'm interested in learning more about that from everyone around the table. And if incentives is something we can talk about, then that might be a way to go forward. That's it for my comments.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Hensy.
Thank you. So I do share the concern with Councilmember Mosca that we would see some of these units slip into short-term vacation rentals. So I hope we're putting all the resources and energy we have into making sure that we're proactively keeping these off of all the hosted platforms, because it's really important that they don't turn over to short-term rentals. And then, we get lax in a couple of years and we're not doing the sweeps to make sure that they're not there. So if it means that we're putting more resources to that, I hope that we do that. I had similar questions to Councilmember Lyons about the ADU. So it sounds like one of the recommendations that we could make is that every ADU would be affordable. And I really like that idea. It's very attractive to us because I see that as fitting in with our housing element goals. But I hope that we would also be able to include some missing middle affordability requirements too, because I think that oftentimes that's who we're seeing being able to rent brand new structures. And then as discussed before, as much as I respect my colleague, Councilmember Kranz, I have a little different idea about ADUs and affordability, because when I look across my peer group in the city of Encinitas, they're not qualifying for affordable homes, but they, as doctors and lawyers, they are able to attain home ownership by buying a duplex with their parents. And so I am hopeful that this will bring us some more attainable housing. And on that question of ADUs and imposing a size limit to that, are you recommending that we do that? Because to me, it seems like if we have a huge parcel, why wouldn't we try to have a 2-bedroom ADU instead of an 800-foot square ADU if it means that a family could live there? So I'm just wondering if you've done any of that analysis and if you're making a recommendation to us based on our housing element goals.
So we can always, I think it was just to start the conversation of maybe limiting that size to 800, because that's what the law currently has said is the 800 square foot as far as the 2 single-family homes. And so allowing an ADU of 800 square foot we thought was a good starting point. We currently allow up to 1,200 within our ADU ordinance. In some cases, yes, we will have big lots that will potentially be doing 2 units. And then if they did a lot split, maybe 2 more units, and then maybe 4 ADUs under the way it's currently written, if they meet all the development standards. So that includes lot coverage and things like that. So if we did limit it, we could look at limitations based on lot size and the coverage further versus just looking at the development standard as a whole for that lot that's, let's say, 20,000 square feet. So we could look at that as a start and just say it's a percentage of, but not to exceed something.
I'd be more in favor of something like that.
Okay, were those the end of your comments? Okay, I'll make a few comments and then we'll go to the Planning Commission. So I, in general, supported the recommendations that staff made in the staff report and verbally, except for 2 that I just wanted to raise. So the first one has to do with this question of the ADUs. So the way that, I appreciate that last comment right there. So the way that I was thinking about it is that the historic perspective of having had policies about ADUs in the city that required affordability for many years resulted in nobody choosing to build ADUs. And so we had very few ADUs built. And when we, part of this was driven by the state laws changing, but when we lifted that and said ADUs don't have to be deed restricted affordable, we have had a lot of ADUs that have been built. We also did other things like expand the footprint they could build in and various things. But that, from my perspective, has been very successful. So we have a lot of ADUs, and if my memory serves me from our previous staff reports about ADUs that upwards of 40% are naturally affordable. So we're actually getting RENA credit for our ADUs in affordability in these low income and very low income and moderate income categories because they are actually built by the market, naturally affordable. So my preference would be that we not deed restrict them. And that's going to the point of we want people to build ADUs. And I think in the big picture, ADUs are very compatible with single family zoning. And as I've mentioned before, but I'll just repeat again, I think some of the highlights are that it allows multi-generational families to live and people to take care of, have a social safety net that takes care of the family units by allowing both independence and connectivity. It also allows the homeowner to be the owner of this property instead of them being rentals being owned by large corporations, that these are being rented a lot of times to people who then are the landlords, and it gives the value back to the landowner. And that, I think, is something we do want to promote in the city. So I'm in favor of us allowing ADUs to continue to be prosperous and to be desired and to be built and to provide housing and opportunity in our city, throughout our city. So my preference would be that we not have an affordability requirement, but I did the previous conversation with Councilmember Hinsey. I think it's a really good idea to look at overall lot size or some other way to have a threshold. So over a certain size, there would of a development, that the ADU could be bigger. So it could accommodate families, but having 800 square feet, which Councilmember Kranz described as downsizing the ADUs, I feel comfortable with that too. Because I think there's a market for the tiny homes. You know, we talk about tiny homes, and 800 square feet is still bigger than a tiny home. So it's certainly possible for people to live comfortably in that. And it seems like it might have less of an impact on neighborhoods and permeable open space than that if it's a smaller ADU. So I'll just throw that out there as the first thing that I think is really important that we discuss is that overall policy about ADUs and making sure that we're not imposing something here that doesn't promote this type of housing that I think is really positive for our city. And then the second, and I'm eager to hear the planning commissioner's thoughts on this too, because we'll be circling back to the council after we hear from the Planning Commission. And then the second thing was that there was one part that you mentioned about adding a 6-foot separation requirement to the detached buildings on the same lot. And I just wanted to make sure how that fits in with the other statement, which is that the city cannot adopt standards such as greater setbacks, a lower height limit, lower floor area ratio, or greater open space requirements for units built under SB9 than apply to single-family residences constructed within the same zoning district. So I don't know if we were planning to change that for everything or in terms of a 6-foot separation requirement.
So as currently designed in our heads, because we have not drafted this, what we would be doing is an actual SB9 chapter in our zoning code, so that this chapter would live on its own and would be applied to these properties, and would reference our existing zoning code. So this 6-foot separation would only apply to the SB9 lots. It wouldn't apply to all the other lots. We did already talk to a special counsel, and this is one of the ways in which development standards in other cities are being implemented because we're now putting 4 buildings sometimes on a single family, what would normally just have had a single family lot building on it. And so to allow for more permeability, more open space, and more air and light to go through our buildings.
But what about the city cannot adopt standards such as greater setbacks, et cetera?
So the building separation is between the buildings themselves, so within the lot, so not the setbacks from the sides of the property, so it's not greater than the 4 feet. And then as long as the buildings, again, allow the 800, but would still allow the regular development that would be allowed, we could potentially do those 6 foot. Again, none of the standards, if you can't do the 2 800 square feet, you can't apply any standards until they can get those 2 800 square foot buildings.
Okay, so we don't see it as a standard.
A standard that would impact, we feel like it's small enough that it wouldn't impact the ability to develop or reduce the intensity on the lot.
Okay. Yeah, because that SB 330 prohibits reductions of intensity. And so, that.
Right, so we're not going to change the FAR, we're not going to change the open space requirements. We are just trying to create a little bit more space between buildings that we currently don't require within our single-family zones. It is in our multifamily zones that our buildings do have space requirements.
Okay, so the 6 foot would apply also to the ADU.
It would only apply to the main structures, so the 2 primary units.
Oh, okay. So not the ADU to the home.
Right.
I see. Okay. Okay, great. So those were my comments. I also just want to echo some of my colleagues saying that short-term rentals we should clearly be very strict on that and very involved and make sure that we dedicate appropriate city resources to making sure they don't become vacation rentals. So I do want to make sure that we don't have a problem there that we could prevent. So let me go ahead and call on Chair Ehlers.
Okay. I noticed quite a few of the council members asked clarifying questions and are going to come back. Did you want us to only ask clarifying questions, or do you want us to do the whole ball of wax, one shot?
I
and
mean,
we're done?
given time that, I want everyone to be able to speak. And so I think you should ask your questions and give your comments.
Wow. Okay. So with that, first question for staff, and I'll start with clarifying questions because I think there are some big ones.
But wait, Chair, if you, as the chair who usually goes last, if the chair would like to go last, you could you could have your colleagues go first and go last if that would help you.
That would be fine.
Okay.
And that's what we typically do in Planning Commission is I'll speak last. I typically am not the first one speaking. So
Right.
why don't we follow the same way and start at the far end and work this way?
Okay,
And,
it is Robert's rules that the chair goes last. So, okay, so should we start with Commissioner Sherrod? Would you like to start?
Yes.
Great.
Oh, I'm on. Okay. So I have a few thoughts. And first of all, in terms of the financial considerations, I do think there are some. It wasn't shown on the information that was given to us. Obviously, permitting collects fees. A new building increases property taxes. More cars driving on roads creates more wear and tear and cost of replacement. But we do charge impact fees, right, for offsetting for things like increasing the number of schools or size of a school or repairing a road. But anyway, I do think those financial costs should be examined. And I really think that every part of it is taxed in terms of, the building of it, salaries get taxes. There's a lot of financial aspects to building. And so to put that there's no financial impact, I think is wrong. In terms of affordability of ADU, I think it's a policing nightmare. I would be fantastic if we could do it and have affordable units. But I have a different thought on it. I think there should be an overlay near transit locations, public transit. And those areas, we should have the ADUs without having to require the parking, which is ministerial already. I think that it's important for us as a community to consider the impact environmentally of having more coverage, and I believe Joy mentioned the permeability of open space. As we add, if they're not contained in an already existing footprint, then they're adding hard cover. They're adding more driveways probably, roofs, carport coverings, patios, whatever. They're a lot more hard cover potentially. So that would increase runoff, which is a problem for us already at Encinitas, as we know, which we have dealt with well, I think, in some ways. But when we think about these, okay, we have one lot, let's say, with one house right now. Okay. Now we're going to split that lot. We're allowed to put 2 houses and 2 ADUs. What about JADU? Would that also be another unit? Could it potentially be 6 units instead of 1?
It would be 4 max, so 2 primary and then 2 ADUs or junior ADUs.
Okay, so
4 max.
no JADU?
It could be an ADU or a junior ADU. It could be either or. So 4.
Oh, I see.
So 2 primary
So it's
units and
maximum
2 small.
of 4.
4.
Maximum of 4. All right, so let's say right now, we have about 23,000 single-family residences. Is that correct? 23,000? Yeah, something like that. And if we quadruple it, and we have to quadruple the drivers driving on our roads, I do think those costs are going to be higher for repairs on our infrastructure. And I think that other considerations, such as the loss of vegetation, I mean, every time you add hard cover, you have site clearing, grubbing, removal of topsoil, removal of plant matter. And what if a mature tree happens to be in the middle of one of those small Cardiff lots? Let's say it's an 80-year-old avocado tree. Is that okay with you guys that they can remove it and add 2 units? I think there's a cost in that for our climate. We're in the middle of a climate crisis. So for me, those kinds of costs really need to be thought through. Let me see, I have a couple other thoughts. Yeah, so okay, and my other thoughts are, as we add these additional units, will they block solar access for other neighboring lots, potentially? And so I'm concerned about solar access, and I'm concerned about view access. I know that our general plan has provisions within it that protect some of that. I know that California has solar access law that protects some of that, but I want to know more about that. I also want to know about lot size. The lot sizes vary hugely. Teeny tiny lots in Cardiff, let's say, to really bigger lots in Encinitas Estates, let's say, in New Encinitas. I'd like to understand better how you decide if we're okay with having 4 units on the little tiny lot, and on the other big lot, it's a whole different thing. There may be, but still, it's hard cover. So I'm concerned about that. Preservation of mature trees and vegetation is a first line of defense against the climate crisis. I happen to be very concerned about our climate, and I believe that we should do everything in our power to preserve those trees. And I want to know if that becomes an obstacle to having 2 800-square-foot units, dwelling units, on a split lot situation. Would you be okay with them saying, well, we can't keep that tree because, you know, we've got to have 4 units total here, and so that tree has to go? Is that okay or not okay? I think our general plan, what is it called here? Let me look. Right, in our environmental standards include, where is it? Sorry, I lost my spot. Oh, yes, it's in our resource management element that we do protect those mature trees, that we protect other things. So, but is that an objective standard that applies to this? So no, you can't remove that mature tree just because you want to have 4, 2 on each lot. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Ryan.
Okay, so kind of piggybacking off of some of the talk about the 800 square foot limit, I would agree that there should be some variety. I have a concern that if we say that 800 square feet is the limit, they're all going to be 800 square feet if the lot size allows it. And in Leucadia and other places, there are lots that could have a 1,200 square foot unit. There's a lot of ADUs that have been going up in my neighborhood that I see on a daily basis, and they all look to be pretty much the same size and look kind of a lot of the same type of ADU. And I do think we should try to encourage, if we can, even if it's with a variety of sizes, encourage differentiation and originality by allowing different size ADUs where we can, up to the 1,200 square foot, if the lot size allows. So what we've done in the Planning Commission with our objective standards is we put together staff has put together some grids, some lists and grids where you have to meet certain, if the lot size is, so we could do it here, it could be a lot, so if a lot size is between this and this, then the ADU size could be between this size and this size, or something like that. And so it would be very easy for somebody who's looking to do a lot split and put in the ADUs to go to the grid and figure out where they fit within that and how they can build based on the lot size. As long as they meet the setback requirements and everything else. So I think that could be a place where we could utilize what the city planners have done for us in the Planning Commission with the objective standards. When we put in the different kinds of playground equipment or the pathways, something that we did with that. And I had a question about the junior ADUs and I think that we could work that into the same kind of grid, because a junior ADU, which is attached to another home, I could see a lot of situations where if you have a junior ADU that's now attached to a main residence, then you could allow for a bigger separate ADU as well. I don't feel like there's a lot of information on how the junior ADU really fits into this whole plan. And I do know people that have junior ADUs within their homes that have separate entrances. So I think that the city should look at how junior ADUs, how they interact more with SB9 as well. Another question was the driveway it's the driveway may be shared by no more than 2 lots. I can see situations where if there's a lot split and now you're going to have lots that are in the back. We have situations like it in my community where lot splits have been done or not. It's just designed that way, where there's a driveway down the middle that services 4 single-family homes. And it is one driveway. So I think maybe it could be revisited on a driveway being shared by more than 2 lots. And I also think that speaks to what Susan and some other people have said regarding open space and resources and being able to keep softscape, because I think that if you allow more than 2 lots to share a driveway, we can cut down on the number of driveways we have through this process. And I had a question too about the non-conforming zoning conditions. I know we can't require the correction of non-conforming zoning conditions, but the new ADUs that would be built, they couldn't also piggyback onto the non-conforming, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so they'd have to be conforming, right? And I think that's all I have now. Thank you.
Jen, can you answer that junior ADU question?
Sure. A junior ADU is limited to 500 square feet. So the way that SB9 works, you get a max of 4 units. So what we've identified is that you can have 2 primary units, which is the 2-unit development component, and then the 2 ADUs. And that's per lot. And so if you do an urban lot split, then you again could do 2 primaries and 2 ADUs. When we say ADUs, that could be an ADU or a junior ADU. But remember, a junior ADU also is cut out of a single-family home. It's supposed to be either constructed from their garage or from one of their bedrooms or something like that.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Dalton.
Thank you. My comments, I guess, to address the changes, the 6-foot separation, I don't see the need for that. I think a lot of this, the pure physicality of fitting 4 units onto a lot is going to, by its very nature, limit some of the sizes of the ADUs and things like that. So the changes that pertain to trying to limit the physical size of the ADU or the placement of the buildings, I think would be unnecessary. And maybe I'm switching, but to the ADU size particularly, if you've got a small lot and you're trying to fit 4 units on it, they're by nature going to be smaller units. And I think that would be a naturally occurring limitation. The separation seems a little arbitrary. If you're allowed to build a duplex anyway as 2 primary units, those would be attached. And so it doesn't matter to us if they're separated by 5 feet or, why the 6-foot separation requirement. I think it's interesting that we all seem to express a real concern for our environment, and I share that concern. To me, stormwater is one of the most regulated aspects of a building permit and the design process right now. And so I don't see anything in this law that limits the engineering department's ability to require retention and treatment and all of the rest of that before the water leaves the site. As it relates to open space, I think the bigger environmental issue is that we all live in a way that we cannot use mass transit. We all have to drive everywhere we go, and that's partly because we can't establish the critical mass to support bus stops and all the rest of that. And so I think this goes a long way to addressing long-term mobility and environmental issues. I think our primary one of the primary drivers of the environmental problems is that we're all driving single-engine cars and by ourselves. So I think this actually benefits our environment by increasing the density in our neighborhoods. I like the comments regarding the missing middle and the natural affordability. I think this is addressing those. If there were any other requirements, such as the ADUs being set aside for affordable use, I think there should be other incentives to encourage that. But I don't see, I think this all falls into that kind of natural affordability stance. I wouldn't particularly want to see further limits put on the ADU by who they get rented to. I agree also with the short-term rentals. I don't want to see a bunch of short-term rentals coming in to these areas. And I'll leave my comments at that. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Doyle.
Thank you. Let's see. So first, I just want to say I'm really happy Jennifer Gates is working on this one. We really worked her tail off when we did the objective design standards last time, and I think we'll be able to work from that as we move forward. So I feel confident we're going to be able to craft some objective standards here. ADUs is where I put most of my focus. I agree with several of our commissioners here. I think the size, limiting the size for smaller lots, I mean, I'm already playing with it now, picturing one of those 2,500-foot lots that we've got in Cardiff, which are R11, I'm pretty sure of some of them. And I'm picturing them split in half, and I'm picturing duplexes put on each with 2 ADUs each. The ADUs, if they're there at all, will be minuscule. And they probably will be smaller than 800 feet and probably affordable or relatively affordable. So given that, I say those issues, the size and the affordability, will basically handle themselves based on the lot size itself. And I agree with you, Mayor Blakespear. When we do require affordability, people don't build ADUs. And but when they do build them, there's an absurdly high percentage of them end up as affordable and count towards our RHNA numbers. And so I'm a huge fan of ADUs. Now, given all that, I'm concerned about the densification of these. So I know I was reading an article, it was possibly Coast News or the Trib, about how Encinitas had allowed 8 dwelling units per lot as opposed to 6, as some of our neighbors have, because we may have ADUs on each. I'm just looking at I know, Tony, you mentioned the 80 by 200 lots in Leucadia, and I've seen several of them with 3 two-story homes there, and I'm picturing each of them sliced in half, and duplexes put on each with ADUs put on each, and instead of 3 lots, which I might think of as 3 homes, possibly with ADUs, I could be looking at 24 family units living on those 3 lots. And that's frightening. There are some lots where people will be appreciative of that, but there are other lots where it'll be a nightmare. So I wasn't part of the discussion on when and how many ADUs we put in, but I think I have plans I hope to discuss in the future for how we can increase the growth of ADUs, but I think we're giving away too much in this one. I think anyone who takes advantage of this, especially with an urban lot split, and then the two duplexes, then the 4 ADUs, anyone's neighbor could suddenly have 8 units on it. And that's, no one's done it yet, but as soon as they do, people will start screaming and they'll start realizing. So I would perhaps urge limiting that. I'm not sure. Staff would have to look into just how many must we have, and really should they be part of this SB9 lot split at all? Or should we find other ways to incentivize ADUs? I don't need to go into great details. I agree, short-term rentals, and I think staff, I've talked to Roy on this one. There's a service we use that scans things for things like this. I'm very concerned about the fire hazard in Alevenhain. I know it's listed in the staff report. Since we have fire hazard mitigation standards, that means that now you can build pretty much anywhere there. And I would urge us to take a second look at those fire hazard mitigation standards and make sure that they are really up to snuff. Because, you could take any one of those lots in Lone Jack and they're big. You could carve them up huge. You could put in, there's another potential 24 residents and their families and their animals. And, how many times does that have to happen before we've got another 500 people trying to get out of there during a fire emergency? And I could go into detail on a lot of other things. I don't think this is the time or place for it. I think it's best if we share our primary concerns with you now and move forward. That's all I got for you right now.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Let me just ask one clarifying question before we go to the chair. So he was talking about 8 units. Is that accurate, the 8?
So the way that the urgency ordinance is right now, if you do an urban lot split, you then end up with 2 units and or 2 parcels. On each parcel, you can have 2 dwelling units and then the 2 ADUs. And so that's where that 8 is coming from. When you do the urban lot split with a 2-unit development, each jurisdiction has the ability to say whether or not to allow ADUs. You don't have it with just a regular 2-unit development because you are allowed 4 units under SB9.
Okay, thank you. Okay, go ahead, Chair Ehlers.
Yeah, and that, boy, that I wanted to make that point, that we're talking 8 units on a current lot. So my first point is FAR. We don't have FAR on all of our zones. Can we add, under SB 330, can we add a FAR where we don't have one if we're not restricting it more? No. Okay, so on my half-acre lot, I could build roughly 100,000 square foot building because I have no FAR limit on RR2 out in Alevenhain. So these 8 buildings, 8 units, could comprise a very large size. And we are basically paving over quite a bit of land. If we don't put some sort of, I'll say average maximum size for the units, and certainly some average maximum size or maximum size on the ADU. So I'm a strong proponent for putting some limits in there. Clarifying questions. Can this be combined with density bonus in any way, shape, or form?
No.
Can we put wording in there that is explicit so that we don't have a future change in interpretation?
Sure. So when I say no, let me just clarify. So you can't apply SB9 and density bonus at the same time because density bonus requires a minimum of 5, right? So if you were to have a density bonus project and they came forward and they said they wanted to create these lots for like a single family development, then those lots, yes, they can have 2 units per lot. So that is allowed. You cannot then subdivide all those lots you created under one owner. You cannot subdivide all those lots. So you may be able to subdivide a few of them, depending on how many there are under SB9. So that's what I wanted to clarify. You can't, it wouldn't be done at the same time. You'd have to do the density bonus project first before you could even talk about the SB9.
Okay, so much like SB 9 cannot be applied twice to the same parcels, could we put something where density bonus you cannot collect? Because the game I can see played in the future is that someone does the lot split, leaves it vacant. Someone does the lot split next door, a different person does a lot split, and another person does a lot split. You now have 4, 8, I guess you'd have 2, 4, 6. As soon as you hit 6, boom, you do density bonus, you recombine them. A new fourth owner comes in, recombines them. Is there a way we can put a rider over the top that says this shall not be combined with density bonus in the future? Because we're going to get another 50% potential density. So
That we'll
we could.
definitely explore with special counsel.
Okay. You talked about the 4-foot setback. So the side yard and rear yard are always 4 feet? And is it only 4 feet if they can't achieve 2 800 square foot?
Right now, it is 4 feet if they cannot achieve the 800, but I am clarifying that with special counsel. And also, I did not say this at the beginning, HCD has not come out with any guidance yet. And so still crossing my fingers that it comes out before we start.
Okay. And then if you're within the normal setbacks, if you encroach into the normal setbacks and you go, let's say 4 feet, you're limited to 16 feet high? Is that
Correct.
one story?
Correct.
Okay. Can they come within the setback and then go up? Or is it the entire building, maximum height 16 feet?
They can come within outside of the setbacks, so within the developable area, and they can go up to whatever the max height is.
Okay. So if they're within the normal setbacks, they can do 2-story, 1,200 square foot ADUs, and they can do whatever size is allowed by the FAR, if there's an FAR on that lot, correct?
FAR and or the open space requirements. But again, our limit on ADUs is 1,200 square feet.
Okay, great. Let's see. So we did CPPs on by right projects. Can we, and those were ministerial, I believe. Can we require CPP on these projects?
We were informed that this would not qualify. CPPs, no meetings in regards to any SB9 projects.
So how is that different than a by right that's ministerial also?
The design review, because we did go to Planning Commission for design review. In this case, for SB9 projects, the design review is going to be ministerial as well. So it specifically states no public hearings at all, not even for coastal development permits.
And then for the 1,200 square feet, is that net or gross? I didn't see that.
Wait, one more time.
It's a question to ask then, if we don't know yet. I want to make sure we're
Are you
explicit.
talking about the lot size?
So the example that jumped in my mind was the floodplain lots in Liebenheim, let's take, where it's 2/3 floodplain and 1/3 not floodplain. Does the 1,200 feet come from just the non-floodplain area or the entire gross lot? And the same would apply in hillside areas with greater than 25% slope.
We'll confirm, but I am pretty sure it is the gross, but we'll confirm with the state law. I'll look
Okay.
closer in just a second.
Short-term rental, what is the enforcement mechanism to stop that?
The code enforcement?
Code enforcement? Okay. And let's talk about the 3-year rental requirement. What is the enforcement measure? What is the method that the city will ascertain whether or not there has been a rental for 3 years? Does there have to be a rental contract? Does there have to be, how does the city insert themselves in the history of a lot to ascertain the validity of that relationship?
Sure. So we have a couple of different things. One is It's a housing form that's been created, as well as a tenant income form. And that housing form is filled out by the applicant. And in that form, they identify how many units are currently on the property, how many units they are proposing to demolish. They also say whether or not it has been used as a rental or not. They say whether it was restricted, et cetera, et cetera. They'll go through the list of the things that we have identified and identify how many of those units fall under that. We will also look at all the covenants. We'll look at the RBR, determine how many units. We also, Google's amazing. So you could actually look up past rents when things were on Craigslist or other types of rental, Trulia, things like that. And also, I'm looking at doing an affidavit in which they would sign. So we do have a SB9 supplement that they have to fill out. And it does say that all the information that they are providing is true and correct to the best of their knowledge, and a number of other identified caveats. They know that they're going to have to do a covenant. They know they have to do an affidavits. So they acknowledge everything. But I'm looking at an actual affidavit for the actual housing form to say that what they're providing is true to the best of their knowledge, that they will sign and notarize.
Okay. And so the enforcement of the covenant and the affidavit would be through code enforcement and through the city attorney?
That would be the city attorney's office.
Okay. And there was discussion earlier about the number of ADUs historically that get counted towards RENA. My recollection is the percent is 23, not 40. What is it?
It's the 40, I think, is including low and very low, potentially moderate, but it's 20. I think we ended up settling on 25% low. I'm trying to remember what the exact numbers were last year. And we are currently preparing the annual progress report to get the numbers for this past year, so that we'll have those numbers ready when we have the discussion.
But were the numbers 40% that we got credit against RENA?
I can't remember exactly what the numbers were
My
off the top of
recollection
my
in the
head.
fifth cycle, we dropped, in the fifth cycle, we dropped down to 23%. From previously, in fourth cycle, we assumed 50, and then 23. So 1 out of 4 is all we're getting. We're getting 3 market rate, one restricted. That's my recollection, but I think that's something I'd like to see, is how effective we are at really turning ADUs. And that goes to my argument or my position, where I think we do need low income requirements on ADUs, on at least a portion of the ADUs, preferably all the ADUs, because I don't believe we're going to generate even moderate. And I like Kelly's suggestion of moderate and low and very low, and we could figure out a way to do that so that there is some credit. Let's see. I think I got most of my questions answered. So like I said, I would be very much for a maximum average size requirement for both the units and for the ADUs. Obviously, the ADUs would be much smaller. I like the idea of proportioning it to the size of the lot, because I think the differences on a small Cardiff lot versus a large, 1 to 2 acre old Encinitas or even a Liebenheim lot, they're very different problems, and we want to make it objective standards. Let's see. There were some definitions in there of determining 25% of the existing exterior wall. I'd like to tighten that up to be much more objective. Is that the linear length, or is that the area wall? That type of stuff. And it said something about including porches and balconies, and I would like to be very explicit on how you include that. Usually I would just use the exterior wall and not go out and use a balcony or anything that was not enclosed per our current definitions. And then we should also be explicit and say that in our treatment in this, and I would probably change it and say ADU/JADU everywhere, so it's very clear it's one or the other. You get 2 and no more than 2 as required by SB9. And I think that's my comment, so thank you.
Okay, well, thank you to our planning commissioners. We appreciate all of the variety of different feedback you offered. So now I'll go back to the council. Councilmember Kranz.
Yes, thank you. And I would point out that $3.1 million duplex next door to me did, in fact, previously was purchased by a young man someone who was also sharing it with their mother. And those are situations that I really hope to see be common in the SB9 projects is a collaboration between family members. I think that would be great. And, you know, ultimately, I think it's going to be critical to see how this shakes out in terms of affordability. Maybe the $3.1 million duplex next to me is an aberration, and that there is a way to acquire property and develop under SB9 that will result in some missing middle housing. That would be great. I do want to express my appreciation to Councilmember Lyons for bringing up stormwater issues, because we have some neighborhoods that are in a bowl. And while Mr. Dalton's correct, there are some pretty stringent standards for stormwater having to do with detention basins and other things, other facilities. It's my understanding that those are generally designed to a one-year storm. And we know that we have been having some fairly significant storm events that greatly exceed that. So in those bowls, for example, the houses on Hermes in Leucadia, there are houses on Glaucus, there are houses in the vicinity of Fulvia, Orpheus, and Hymettus. There are several neighborhoods that, with the additional hardscape that would result from these splits and projects, could very much impact the neighbors in terms of stormwater issues. So I'm not sure how we can tighten that up, but it would be good to be able to identify those parts of the community. They wouldn't be in floodplains. Maybe that means that we can't tighten the standards, but there will be some impacts. So I hope we can take a look at that. I agree that ADU construction has been affected over the years by deed restriction. But I think that's more related to existing single-family homes who were considering an ADU, and when you impose the condition that it be affordable, deed restricted affordable, that disincentivized the construction. On these projects under SB9, I think there's going to be a much greater likelihood that the construction of an ADU will be at the same time as the main dwelling unit. So that changes the calculus significantly about whether they'll be constructed. And I think anything that we do to create a disincentive for these to become some investor windfall by creating the maximum number of units with no affordability conditions on them, I think is a mistake. So I would hope that we would look at some deed restriction requirements on the ADUs, even if it were to be a shorter term than 55 years or in perpetuity, maybe a 20-year deed restriction, something that is going to disincentivize the creation of LLCs for the purpose of trying to create a windfall profit. And I think that it doesn't take much to see that small units are fetching significant amounts of money, much greater than what is considered to be affordable. Then lastly, Commissioner Sherrod mentioned this issue of fee collection, and it would be my hope, I would expect that each of these units the fees would be calculated, essentially it would be twice as much as if you were building a single-family home. Is that correct? And that's those projects' fees are calculated based upon square footage and other things, right? So is it going to have the same fee calculation structure for each unit and the square footage and other things? And there will be school fees that theoretically would be double because there are these two units. So is that what we can expect from the calculation of fees for projects under SB9?
Yes, there's no fee changes.
There's no fee changes, but it won't be treated as a single project for the purpose of fee calculation. It'll be two different projects.
Yeah, so different fees are calculated based on square footage. Also, park and rec fees are based on the lot and when the lot existed. So we're not changing. We're going to apply the same formulas that we're currently using right now on the SB9 projects.
So for these projects, there will be equity between a project that has twice as many dwelling units than a single-family home with just one dwelling unit.
It depends on the fee. So like I said, we have park fees, traffic mitigation fees. So traffic mitigation fees are calculated based on a different formula. It's not just based on the number of units, it's based on the number of trips. So the more units, the more trips, therefore it'll be more fees. School fees are calculated differently based on square footage. Parks and rec fees are calculated based on a number of lots.
So that's all very complicated, I get that. And, I hope that we look at this to make sure that we are making certain that, to the point that she made, we are not, allowing people to kind of do an end run around the important fees that are necessary for addressing some of the many impacts. So that's all I would ask, is that as we develop this, that we keep that in mind.
Yes, we'll look at all of our fees and evaluate. If we need to increase fees, we'll bring that forward to your consideration.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Lyons. But wait, hold on a second. I see people are coming in for the city council meeting, which is supposed to start in just a couple minutes, but we're finishing up our joint planning commission city council meeting. And so we're just going to go ahead and finish that, and then we'll get to the city council meeting in a little minute. So go ahead, Councilmember Lyons.
I'd like to connect the dots on a few things my colleagues on the commission and council have said. One is touching back on so on stormwater, but also on mature vegetation. I understand that, any stormwater solution can be engineered and it would meet the permit requirements. But what I'm beginning to envision is we're looking at maximizing the impermeable surfaces on lots that currently are more permeable. We're looking at having more driveways. We're looking to have more roofs. We're having, and this is the reality of it. And I know that an engineering solution could solve the stormwater management in most cases, but what I'm envisioning with taking out mature vegetation and in order to accommodate all this is that we're really going to damage our urban forest. And I would love to see some solutions that address that. We're just going to have less ability for water infiltration. We're going to have less landscapable area. Now, I hadn't even asked the question, what landscape requirements would be applied to these SB9s? Maybe that's something you could follow up with. But if we're going in and reducing the permeable surface and eliminating mature vegetation, we're really creating an overarching issue for ourselves that goes against what we say we want to do in this community, and that is foster our urban forests. And I feel like the state SB9 is silent on mature vegetation, but I also am getting the impression that even if we had a preservation of mature vegetation standard, that we would have some trouble like using it in this setting. Maybe I can ask that as a quick question.
I'm going to rely on them if I'm saying this incorrectly, but if there is, I don't know if there is an objective standard. If there is an objective standard in regards to landscaping and mature vegetation, and it could be a standard in our policy documents or in our municipal code itself, that can be applied. But again, we still have to allow the 2 800 square foot homes. So how that lays out on the parcel and with regular setbacks and things like that. So again, it needs to be an objective standard in place.
Sure, okay, I think it could be, but I'd like to add it to the conversation so that we can understand what our outcome is going to be. And I think our community would want to make sure we have vegetation in the outcome. And it leads me to, I think this is my final comment, I would love to see us evaluate specific models. So we talked about a Leeuwenhoek where maybe you've got FEMA floodplain, maybe you have horses, you have a larger acreage. What would this look like there? And then also we talk about Cardiff, we talk about Leucadia, stormwater management, really big issues. And maybe perhaps there's 2 lots that create one assessor's parcel. If we could look at the different scenarios and understand visually and how you do the modeling of how this works out, I think that would help, especially people who are more visual than based on the narrative, to see what that would look like in our community based on the different scenarios. I think that would be helpful. Those are my comments.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor.
So I share the concerns that she's just expressed very well, so I won't repeat them. And also just second the points that she made, and also say that I would like to see at some point additional criteria and objective standards for the high wildfire areas. And so if we're going to see SB9 applicable and applied in those areas, I want to make sure that, that we're clear on what the standards are. Also, just thank you for this conversation with the Planning Commission. And I think just to Councilmember Lyon's point, Commissioner Ryan, I think those comments that were made about the driveways, I think those are ways that we can actually get to the same point, which is that perhaps there are multiple units sharing that driveway, not just one or two. And that may allow for less, more permeable space area. Also, the ADUs, I think I like Commissioner Ryan, I like the idea of where it would basically be 800, but that based on some sort of analysis of the lot coverage, that it could go higher. And so I think that kind of line of thinking between Commissioner Ryan and Dalton that was kind of coming out, I think, if you guys can continue that as our subject matter experts on this, continue that conversation where that kind of goes. I think that sounds something that's good. I think 800 predominating would be good, but I think that there may be some parcels, uniqueness of parcels that allows for kind of some sort of sliding scale. And so that may be good. I think that we should absolutely understand how we can ensure that these units are not going to be short-term rental units, making sure that we have a process at City Hall to inspect and make sure that these are not short-term rental units, especially if they are ADUs or ADUs. And I want to continue the conversation about affordability, whether it's deed restricted. I'm not necessarily going to say whether I support one or the other, but I think that there's an argument to be had about the fact that not deed restricting it created more units for us that in the end were actually affordable because of the size of them. But I share the concerns or the feelings of Councilmember Kranz in that we are ultimately looking to have as many affordable units as possible, deed restricted, very low income, moderate level. And so how do we get to that goal? Is it through, hands off and they'll produce, they'll practically speaking, they'll be affordable, or do we deed restrict? But if we deed restrict, will it move into some other thing other than ADUs? So those are some of my final points. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councilmember Hinsey.
So just a follow-up and then also a clarifying question. That line of questioning that Commissioner Ehlers engaged you on, I've done that too with you. Like, if it's not in the covenant, then is it in the recorded parcel? How do we know if the affidavit's correct, if it really was a rental property at some time? And just using the example that we have to compare that to with short-term vacation rental and those who violate our ordinance, for us, it's really easy to figure out how much money they owe us because we go through how many times they listed it and we can come up with a number. And in our enforcement action, we ask for that number back. But also there's the attorney's time that goes into it. There's all the staff time that goes into creating this case. And so it's going to be really difficult, I think, to actually go through the effort of investigating all of this. And then if we do catch somebody that has misrepresented their ownership and their tenancy, I think we should have a really clear path of what the enforcement action will be, how much money that is, how much money that they've taken from an affordable unit that we could have had here in our city, and that when they sign this affidavit, they're aware that it's going to be, if they have misrepresented it, that the penalty is very clear, because we want to keep people from thinking that they can game these extra units that we have. The question that I have that's clarifying is to Commissioner Dalton's point that he brought up about the 6-foot separation. So I think I'd been thinking about this a little bit incorrectly. So in the flag lot situation, I could see why we would want to have this 6-foot separation between the primary structures. But in the alternative one where these units are actually going to be right up next to each other, I can see that we don't want this 6-foot separation because we actually want to increase the amount of space that's on the rest of the lot. So if we impose this 6-foot separation, does that mean we're prohibiting the units from being pegged right next to each other?
Not from them being attached, but from being located detached closer, yes.
Okay, because I think he raises a really good point. They should be able to be right next to each other. And that's all.
Okay, thank you. So I'll just make some final comments. Again, I appreciate the Planning Commission and the variety of comments that you offered and your thoughts about it. I want to just state in the biggest picture that I don't think there's any scenario where our existing housing units, which are about 25,000 or so, are quadrupled, because the predictions of SB9 were that this has a modest effect given the number of lots that could go through this process, but more importantly, the reality of the costs of it. I mean, somebody has to live there for 3 years who's an owner, and so we see that one of the barriers to people building ADUs is the cost of building an ADU. So think about the cost of doing this lot split and building multiple units. I mean, it's just not something that a lot of families are able to take on. So I think there will be some who take advantage of this, but a lot of properties will not, and basically our city will not dramatically change because of this. So I just wanted to make that as a big picture point. My reference to saying that our ADUs end up being upwards of 40% in categories that are either very low, or moderate, which are all the RHNA categories we need, comes from the data that we're collecting now that we're giving a survey to everyone who builds an ADU. So I understand that in the 4th and 5th housing cycles, we were not getting that kind of credit under RHNA. But one of the reasons we're doing these surveys is so we can get more credit in future RHNA cycles, but it's also just a reflection of what the market is providing. So when the market is providing enough or some portion of housing that is not actually only upper income housing, and people are saying this when they're building it. They're filling out the forms saying, if they're renting it to their daughter who moved back in after she got divorced for zero money or for $1 a month, that is an affordable housing unit in our city. So, and they, if they're filling out the form accurately about it, then we are able to demonstrate that is an affordable unit. So I do continue to believe that we should allow ADUs to be built and that we should encourage them by not deed restricting them. Because I just think there's no question that even if you're building a duplex, if you then have to deed restrict for any amount of time, that's, would be something we would consider 55 years or less, that it's a disincentive to build it. Because if you can rent your ADU for $3,000 and the deed restriction says you can only rent it for $1,000, you're just not going to go through that process. So to me, it's just clearly a disincentive. Our ADUs are providing important housing in the city, and so I do think we should not require the deed restriction. I want to emphasize what some of my colleagues and others have said about having a process like an enforcement action as part of the affidavit and figuring out a deterrence around any fraudulent statements that they somehow qualify to build these. Like I do think Councilmember Hinsey was making a really good point about this, that we're so much better off doing the hard work of thinking about how are we going to enforce this, and what is it that we need to know from these people, and how are we going to communicate accurately with them before we get into a problem? Because we really, with our vacation rentals, we really got too far down having a problem before we really started to attack it by making our ordinances stricter and doing this enforcement with code compliance who looks online. And we still had a large number of units that were not paying the TOT tax and registering with us, and we just really don't want that to happen in this, and we're just at the beginning. So I really would like to encourage staff, when you come back to Planning Commission and then to Council, to have a process that's filled out about what you're asking for and how we're doing that, the affidavit process, to make sure that we're deterring that. And the 6-foot question, I think there's been some really good discussion, and I hope that that's fleshed out more. I I think it seems to be different circumstances, and so I just would like that to be fleshed out more when it comes back. And then my last point is that I think we really don't need a lot of additional driveways. Like if you think about a driveway, it's hardscape that's used very infrequently in a day. It's driven over, and that's it. So if we have driveways that are shared by multiple units, I think we're much better off. We have potentially more open space, and driveways we should reduce the number of driveways. I think Commissioner Ryan made a great point about that, and then it was repeated by others, that having driveways be used. We sometimes see this in our other developments where there's a driveway for a development and then the new one goes in and it puts a driveway next to it, and they're basically going to the exact same place, and it's so much hardscape, and you could have one, but we don't have a system that allows that easily to happen. So I think those are my last comments. I think, we're not giving like a motion here. I think you're just taking comments from all of us, and it'll be coming back to the Planning Commission and then back to us. So if you think you have what you need, I think we'll conclude the meeting.
Yes, I do. Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, thank you. And thank you, Planning Commission. Good luck. And we'll see you at the next item. All right. And Council, do you want a quick break? Like 5-minute break? Okay. We need to take a quick 5-minute break. We'll come back at 6:20. And this meeting is adjourned. Officially. It is Wednesday, March 9, 2022 at 6:25. We do have a time certain agenda item for 6:30 because it is statutorily required that we do that. We announce the exact time it's starting. So we will be taking things a little bit out of order so that we can accommodate that. But let's first have our roll call.
Councilmember Hinsey,
Here?
Councilmember Lyons,
Here?
Councilmember Kranz,
Here.
Deputy Mayor Mosca,
Here?
Mayor Blakespear.
Here.
All members of the city council are present.
Okay, and I invite you to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, so we have no special presentations and proclamations, and apparently we have 9 oral communications. Is that right, City
That's
Clerk?
correct.
Okay, so we're going to hold oral communications because we only have 4 minutes and go to the consent calendar. Oh, we do have a closed session. Sorry, we'll go back to that. So, report from closed session.
Yes, on Monday, March 7th, there was a closed session held. There were 2 matters on that agenda, one involving significant exposure to litigation, the second one involving conference with legal counsel. The case was Encinitas Boulevard Apartments versus the City of Encinitas, and there were no reportable actions for either items.
Okay, thank you. So now we have in front of us consent calendar 8A and 8B. Are there any comments on either?
No, there are not.
I will move to approve the consent calendar.
Second?
Motion carries unanimously.
Okay, let's go to at least whoever the first public commenter is.
Okay. That would be Stephen Lord.
I come before you to ask you to consider a proclamation of, which I call a COVID mandate apology and a call for unity. Whereas during the last 2 years, the people of Encinitas have suffered from the effects of various mandates, including failure of businesses, loss of jobs, loss of education, increasing child abuse, domestic violence, and suicide. And whereas it is now clear that the claimed benefits of these mandates did not occur to any significant degree, according to global scientific studies and the experience of other states such as Florida and Iowa that did not have such mandates. And whereas the City of Encinitas failed to independently evaluate the claimed benefits and has actively put up signs and helped implement lockdowns and thus bears some of the responsibility. And whereas the mandates have also been used to create division in our city to the detriment of those people who stood up for their First Amendment rights to oppose the said mandates. And whereas the City of Encinitas continues to be committed to building an inclusive community where all people and all opinions are welcome, now therefore be resolved that the Mayor and City Council of the City of Encinitas, California, hereby proclaims that it humbly apologizes to the people of Encinitas who have been harmed by the COVID mandates, promises to immediately remove all signs supporting such mandates, and promises to independently evaluate any proposed future mandates and consult with all segments of Encinitas society before supporting such mandates, and calls for unity in the treatment of Encinitans, whatever their opinions and status with regard to masks, lockdowns, vaccinations, and the use of therapeutics. Now, you may think this is inappropriate, but I feel it's not, and I think, in my experience, 2 of the hardest things to do in life are to ask for forgiveness and to give that forgiveness. Yet we know from our personal relationships that failure in these difficult things result in ongoing harmony, disharmony, strife, and resentment. So I ask the City Council to ask the citizens of Encinitas for forgiveness for what we have suffered over the last 2 years, and ask the citizens of Encinitas to give that forgiveness back to the City Council, so that we may move on to the needed conversation about what went wrong and how best to avoid it in future. And finally, a couple of quotes. One, a 2,500-year-old quote from The Art of War by Sun Tzu. sometimes the order of the sovereign has to be disobeyed. And a more recent one by Eric Adams of New York, we become a city of no, 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 and we need to get back to having fun. So I'd like to see Encinitas back to having fun, and I hope this is a step forward where we can all unite together and work together despite being vaccinated, non-vaccinated, masked, unmasked, or whatever. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to go, it's just about 6:30, so we'll go to the staff report on item 10A, which is on redistricting. And I apologize to people who might be here for their public comment, but we're going to have to take your public comment after this item.
As we get set up, I'd like to introduce our Spanish translator. She's here to deliver a message and contact information so that those who wish to have translation has it available.
Good evening, everyone. Mi nombre es Ana Nava Colín y soy la traductora certificada que va a estar interpretando al español la reunión de redistribución de distritos esta noche. Si ustedes necesitan traducción al español, pueden unirse a la llamada de conferencia al número 425-436-6334. Nuevamente el número es 425-436-6334 con el código de acceso 1651745. Código de acceso 1651745. Lo único que les pido es que por favor al entrar a la llamada pongan su teléfono en mute o en silencio para que la traducción pueda transcurrir sin interrupciones. Y la traducción va a ser grabada esta noche para que pueda ser escuchada posteriormente. Gracias. Thank you.
And Anna is located in the poinsettia room if anyone would like to join her, if they would like to hear direct translation. Thank you. Mayor, council members, and members of the public, this is our fourth public hearing to consider some proposed maps. And we have here the attorney that is assisting us, Chris Scannell, and also Shannon from NDC. Please proceed.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me back. I have a short presentation before your public hearing, just to remind us where we are and what we need to do tonight. So we are wrapping up the redistricting process. I'm sure people are getting tired of seeing this slide because we've seen it at every meeting, but it's important to remind ourselves that every 10 years we need to go through this redistricting process, and we may need to make sure that the map in Encinitas is in compliance with both federal and state laws and other general redistricting principles, which we've talked about in detail in this project. I wanted to just remind everybody of the process. It's been quite a robust process that we've been through. We started back in the summertime with a first public mapping workshop. We went through waiting for the census data to come out, waiting for the census data to be cleaned up by the state of California so we could use it. And then we've gone through 3 of the 4 required public hearings and had a second public mapping workshop in October. And that brings us to today, which is public hearing number 4. That gives you plenty of time to adopt a map before the deadline of April 17th. So just as a reminder for everybody, this is the map that you have now. We do have the interactive viewer, so any map that I'm showing, we can bring up on the viewer if we want to at some point. But this is the current map. It is very narrowly population balanced at 9.69%, but we're gonna look at other maps as well tonight. So when I say you've had a robust process, you've had a robust process. This is a summary. We showed it last time, but we've updated it as of the last map submission at the end of January. So there were 67 draft maps that were proposed as part of this process. 62 of those came in from the public, and then we produced or did edits to 5 maps. There were some that were not complete or were intended simply to be communities of interest in neighborhoods, but 43 were complete maps, and those have been presented to you or are being presented to you tonight. I did, before I go into the next slide where I'm going to go through the final draft maps, I just wanted to stop here and make one note. So since we last met, there were 2 maps that had come in on the District R website that met the deadline of January 31st. And of those, we processed both of them, and one of them is included here and was included in the packet we sent to you. The other one, inadvertently, when it was pulled over from District R, the data was corrupted, and it made the analysis look like it wasn't a compliant map. And so we didn't include it here. We were informed by members of the public that we might have missed it. It's been up on District R. And so we reanalyzed that map, and I'm going to talk about it. I've added it to the presentation. I'm going to talk about it briefly. But from that, let me move on. So here were the 5 final draft maps for consideration. It included your current map because it is barely population balanced. And then there was map 69847. We fondly called that map 69 last time because it was on page 69 of the packet. And then there are 2 maps that derive from that one that have some adjustments based on feedback that we heard to map 69 or 69847. And then we have one of the new maps, which is 102644. I'll show them to you briefly here. So I start with 2 of the 5 final draft maps, your current map, which is on the left-hand side, and then the new map, 102644. And what we can see at 102644 is it's a 2-coast map. You can see if you start with the pink District 1, makes District 1 a vertical, skinny, north-south kind of district. And then from that, because it's not a horizontal district, everything else is kind of adjusted accordingly. But you wind up with a 2-coast map. And then the other 3 final draft maps are derived from that 69847. So 69847 is the one on the left-hand side. It's page 69 that you saw last time. I will let you know that all 3 of these versions, based on feedback that we received from you and the community, have one small block split. There was quite a discussion about Springwood Street up by Degano Middle School, up where District 1 in the pink and District 4 in the purple come together. And there were 8 houses that were left on the west side of Springwood that had been in District 1 in that original map 69, and it was really probably a census block thing from using District R. So that street has been unified in all of these maps. It was only 8 houses, and it didn't really affect the numbers, but it brings that together. So then the 2 iterations of map 69, so it's 69847C, which is the bottom map, and 69847E, which is the other top map, have a couple of slight differences. I'll just highlight for you that they both deal with Encinitas Boulevard, and they make Encinitas Boulevard a cut between District 2 and District 3. You see that they clean up, there's a little part of up near Degano Middle School in map 69 that went up, the little part that goes up into the pink was cleaned up in both C and E. The biggest thing in map E is if you see off of El Camino Real, basically, if you look at where 3 and 4 come together on El Camino Real, on the original map 69, they kind of reversed what you have now, and on map E, we were able to kind of replicate more the way that you have it now. It may not be ideal from the community standpoint, but the feedback that we had heard is it's something that rather than changing it again, it's something that the community might be more used to. So that's done in E, and we can look at that in the viewer if you'd like. So now let me just quickly talk about an additional public map. It's 106988. So again, this is the one that was in the viewer. It's been up on the gallery the whole time, and I'll let you take a look at it. I will let you know we ran the population balance on it, and the population balance is 4.2%, so it is balanced. If it was one that you had interest in, I'd let Mr. Scannell talk to you about what the procedure would be. And from there, I will turn it back to you guys. I can. Oh, yeah, let me do that. Thank you. That's a good point. The good news about 106988 is when we re-looked at it, we compared it to other maps, and it is, thank you for reminding me, it is almost identical to map 65057. So 65057 was in the packet last time. There are two differences between it and 65057. One is it deals with the lagoon differently, and I know there was a lot of discussion about the lagoon last time, whether it should be in District 4 or 3. This map puts it into 3. That was a difference. And then there are 2 or 3 census blocks up between 2 and 4 that are different. But other than that, it's map 65057. And with that, I will turn it back over to you guys.
Okay, well, thank you so much for that presentation. Let's go to the public comments.
We do have 4: Mark Mayer, Julie Thunder, Bruce Ehlers, and then Chris Stewart.
Good evening. My name is Mark Mayer, President of the Alevinheim Town Council. The Alevinheim Town Council respectfully requests that the council adopts map 69847 or 69847C as the preferred map. The OTC has previously provided written and in-person support of these maps. These maps maintain the long-standing boundaries of Alevinheim, which is critically important to the OTC and its members. Thank you.
Wait, hold on one second. Could you please put the maps back up instead of that last item so that's easier to see? Okay, great. Thank you so much. Or maybe the one that one. Yeah, thank you. He said C.
C is the one on the bottom. Go down.
Yeah. Okay, sorry, Julie. Go ahead.
Could you put up 102644, please?
Oh, sorry.
Okay, Julie Thunder of Cardiff. I recognize that 2 maps came in late, and I understand the process. I was helped greatly by somebody on staff today with understanding that process. But I'm concerned about the way this is played out. We received 102644 late, but on time, but it was after the last meeting. There's confusion with the public as to if any maps should have been allowed after that meeting. But thankfully, someone at the city helped me see that. But I just think you should know that that was very confusing to a lot of people. We thought all of the maps that had been submitted were all that there were going to be submitted. So this 102644, absolutely, I hope nobody on this council considers that map. It divides Cardiff. Again, Cardiff has its own zip code, its own library, its own school district, its own sports clubs. It should not be divided. 92007 should be completely intact in any map you select. And I think tonight on the maps in consideration, that one is completely null and void because it divides 92007. Number 2, could you put up 106988, please? My second point is this late ad map, I think, is the best map you're looking at. It has clean lines, it's logical, it makes sense, it preserves Cardiff, Alevinheim, most of New Encinitas is in one district. District 1 and 2 look clean and well-defined. And aside from what I said earlier about maps being submitted late, when I looked at this, it was just like a golden opportunity, and I hope you guys will take a hard look at it. However, if you select it, I wonder if you have to consider extending this process for another meeting because the public really hasn't had time to consider it. And that's all I've got. Thank you.
There we go. Bruce Ehlers, of Liebenhain. If you go to the, I get to do it. Yep. There we go. So we'll go back to the last workshop, and I just wanted to reiterate the use of a light touch. I really thought several of you picked up on that concept, repeated the term. I think, Catherine, you said use a light hand. Several other council members made the same comment. Joe, you mentioned that you'd like minimal changes, and I still support that. And the city council discussed maps that should minimize the churn of voters' representatives, right? We don't want a wholesale change. And so even Barbara Henry in her UT article used the words light hand and reported that it was consensus. And I'll bring up the city council minutes from that night. And you had a consensus that you would prepare new maps based on map 69847, the one or with minor modifications to reflect the council comments at the meeting of the 19th. So, but with the new map, this new map that was a late drop, as the previous speakers have discussed, this is map 102644. Where did it come from? You had previously narrowed the choice down. I was hoping we didn't miss a meeting, but I guess we understand now how the process worked, and I'm fine with that. But it does not use a light touch, so I think it would be contrary to your previous comments. It splits Cardiff, and that would be a direct contradiction to what the Cardiff Town Council stood here, and they may have even missed this map in the process, and it would result in significantly more voter representative churn. So with that, I would say reject that map. I actually disagree with Julie on, and I'm going to add a few off-the-cuff comments, that we should also reject 106988 because it splits a Liebenhain. And I would agree with Mark being the president of the OTC. I think his two choices maintain at a very small cost because it's that lower portion of a Liebenhain that's getting split. It maintains the integrity of Liebenhain as one. So please reject 102644, 106988, and pick from the I forget the numbers, but the base one and C, those two, the ones that Mark recommended. And if you were to choose to adopt any of the late ads, I do think you need to explain a little more about how that got in here. But more importantly, since it hasn't been available out on the website, I think you'd have to push your adoption from tonight and give the public, because otherwise, I think the Cardiff Town Council would be in here. I think the Liebenhain Town Council would be here in force. So those are my recommendations. Thank you. And that's my 3 minutes.
Chris Stewart?
So I want to thank the council for being here and making this process keep going. I was happy with most of the maps, and all I'd really like to say is that C and E look real good, and that without a letter on it still has District 2 crossing Encinitas Boulevard, which that shouldn't happen. But I think you're doing a great job, and I never got to see the map that Julie likes, so I can't really comment on that. So it's all up to you. Thank you.
That concludes.
Okay, well, thank you to the public who participated in all ways, coming tonight to speak and also submitting maps. And thank you to our staff and to our consultants for doing a great job on this. I'll go ahead and call on my colleagues. Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, thank you to our staff. This has been quite the process, and the process that we had the first time when we adopted the maps 3 or 4 years ago, I thought it was pretty robust, and you guys were involved that time too. And so this one seemed to get even more people involved. So thank you for the outreach. Thank you for everything that you've done so far. Because I think we do have some really good options before us, and I don't think that there's a need for another meeting. I think that we could basically really kind of, as Bruce said, kind of really reflect upon some of our thoughts from the earlier meetings, which was minimal changes. And I think that the map not just because we put it together 3 or 4 years ago and it was a really good map that balanced a lot of interest, but I think that going with a map that is similar to what we've put together a few years ago makes a lot of sense, and it also decreases any kind of confusion with the voters. And so these 3 options, I think, from our last conversation, I think that our staff have put together some really good options. For me, E really wins out, and the reason why it wins out is that it's essentially the map that we have, except that we've decreased the deviation from nearly 10% to 7.45. And so, and not only did we do that, but we preserved the fact that Alevenheim is still touching a waterway, which is important to me. And we also, E. So I think E because it has minimal changes from the current map. It decreases the deviation, which I think is important. It does have the change on the D1, D4, which I think was brought up by Bruce Ehlers at one meeting where we had half the street on Springwood in D1 and the other half in D4. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think we in E and also in C, but E was the other one where we addressed this kind of this movement north with D3, taking in parts of New Encinitas that I think folks found that to be a problem when it went north of Encinitas Boulevard. So in C and E, we have that kind of push down and D2 coming over. The other, I think, positive thing about D2 coming over is the fact that we have one more district that touches El Camino Real. And I think there are a lot of folks in New Encinitas that say that they don't feel the love because them being 19,000, they don't have their own district. Well, now we have 4 districts that actually touch a very important part of New Encinitas, and that is El Camino Real. Everybody has a vested, we all have vested interest in the well-being of the entire city. But to the extent that this map solidifies that, I think that E really does drive home all of it. Minimal changes. We're now at a lower deviation. Even D4 has the waterway, and it really is almost similar to what was before, and we resolved that D1, D4 conflict. So I really think that E is the way to go.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Lyons.
Yes, thank you. I did want to see if I could help clarify that the additional map that came in was allowed, and unfortunately it wasn't understood broadly, but the process did allow for additional maps to be submitted. And so before this evening, we thought there was just that one map, but it was an additional map submitted. And now we understand there's 2. But what these 2 additional maps do is they don't conform with what we stated that is important to us. And Deputy Mayor Mosca hit on some of those. That is to keep the communities as much intact as possible, or intact entirely. And we do want to do that. And I especially hear from my constituents in Cardiff that it's important to keep Cardiff intact. And I believe that, and I support that. But also, I think it's important to keep the other communities intact. So, and then create the 4 districts that we need to create, and do it with a light hand or with a light touch. So some minor revisions, but not major revisions. So I like that too. I do want to emphasize something that's important to me, and I've heard from some of my constituents as well, that the watershed is important, San Elijo watershed, that I believe that it's important that several of the districts are able to touch the watershed. So having a good portion of the San Elijo watershed in Alevenheim and also in Cardiff, I think is a benefit. And so let's see, with that in mind, I've looked at the maps that are the 47 C and E. I think. What are the ones you have up there?
Yes, we have the original, and then we have
The original,
C at the bottom.
and C and E.
You can put them on your screen if you want.
I actually have them in front of me. I just wasn't sure if I had them all. And out of those, I think that the 47E respects what we are aiming for the best, because it doesn't vary the limit between D3 and D4 as much. And I think that it also checks the box for all the other objectives we're aiming for, and that we've thought are the right objectives to push forward for a decision. So I lean towards 47E. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Kranz.
Yes, thank you. And I appreciate all the effort that's gone into this, especially from the public. That's a pretty good number of participants in the process, and I appreciate that. I think that, Bruce, you do get credit for having given voice to, I think, the sentiment of the entire council to begin with as we approach this, which was to not get too carried away with changes. We have seen some other jurisdictions in our community create quite a bit of upheaval with their redistricting process, and I certainly wanted to avoid that. The two late ad maps, unfortunately, do create quite a bit of disruption, and while those of us in Leucadia have that same old 92024 zip code, we do very much appreciate our community boundary lines, and unfortunately, both of the late ad maps split New Encinitas, or excuse me, Old Encinitas and Leucadia in ways that I don't think is acceptable. So while it does clean up Cardiff and kind of keeps the Santa Fe boundary line intact, unfortunately, in my opinion, what it does to Old Encinitas and Leucadia is not where I want to go. So were there any inclination on the council to consider those maps, I would agree that not making a decision tonight would be appropriate. But from where I sit, I want to get back to the 487 base map and then one of the variations, E or C. And I think that I could live with either one. I think that the key to me is that the changes don't cause people to, with the exception of the area north of Encinitas Boulevard, the other changes create a situation where people get a duplicate. They get a vote 2 years instead of waiting 6 years. So, for example, 3 expands into District 2, so those people along Santa Fe will be have the opportunity to select a council member in a 2-year period instead of a 4. So I can live with that adjustment. And again, I don't really have a strong feeling one way or the other between E or C. I did hear, I believe, Olevenheim Town Council prefers C as in Charlie. Is that correct? Yes. Okay, and so, I would probably lean towards that, but again, if the consensus of my colleagues is E, then I could live with that as well.
Okay, thank you. Well, I support map E because it has the lightest touch. So if you look at that boundary between 3 and 4, it's the same. And I think when you look over at the one that's C, you see all that change in there. So we know that District 2 has to change a bit, and we wanted to bring the line down to Encinitas Boulevard. So District 2 is changing, but to me, that line between 3 and 4 is E. This map causes the least amount of displacement. So to me, it seems like this one has the lightest touch. It accomplishes the other goals we talked about related to the lagoon and keeping the historic communities together. And so I am going to go ahead and move this map E, which 2 of my colleagues have already stated that they support it. And I also just want to recognize that this has been a remarkably controversy-free process. So I appreciate all the maps that were submitted, and it seems like people are largely happy with this basically the districts we have, because this is very similar to what we have, and it of course makes the population more equal among all the districts. So
Can I ask one question? And maybe Levittown Town Council could explain whether they have any strong feeling, what is it that made them pick Charlie instead of Echo? And, that I would love to have on the record. And
you can come forward, please, to the microphone. It does seem to me like E respects the District 4 and Levittown better.
Yeah,
No.
I mean, we're kind of splitting hairs here. I mean, the only big difference I see between C and E is that E takes, I think it's Pacific Ranch and Sienna Canyon, takes those which we consider to be part of Levittown. I mean, we have a few members down there, but not a lot. But it takes those and puts it into District 3. I mean, I don't think it's a huge issue for us, but that's kind of what our thought was on that.
I see. And while we wanted to do the light touch, I thought that the key was that they're between 3 and 4, so they still get to vote. But, I guess there's a motion on the table, and I'm prepared to support the motion. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Your key comment was that we're kind of splitting hairs, and so.
I don't think it's a huge issue for us, that area. I think that cutout on E that goes north of Pacific Ranch and Sienna Canyon, I think that's the preserve, is that correct? I'm getting a little confused here, so. Right, and I think E takes part of the canyon too, of the preserve, which is fine. So, yeah, let's.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
I'll second the motion, and I'll just add one or two comments, which is that I think my colleague, Councilmember Kranz, tapped into the fact that, to me, Old Encinitas would be split with the late ad map, and to me, it's important that that community stay together as well. And I am glad to hear that it was just splitting hairs for the town council, because both look pretty good to me.
Okay, thank you. Well, let's go ahead and vote.
Can we go back? You closed it before I could ever get on this.
Says Councilmember Kranz voted yes.
I think I voted.
And the motion carries, but it just was correct.
Let's just, Councilmember Hinsey? I voted yes. Yeah, oh, there we go.
Technology.
Then Deputy Mayor Mosca?
Yes.
Okay, motion carries unanimously.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody, for your participation, and we will move on to the next item, which
Thank
is
you very much.
public comment. Yes, thank you so much. We really appreciate your help.
Thank you.
See you in 10 years.
Okay, so let's go back to public comment.
Here, three speakers, next three speakers, Terry Skelly, Trina Priest, and then Tim Bratton.
Good afternoon, City Council. As a parent of young adult sons, I followed Measure H in our city and the unfolding of marijuana business application processes and accompanying fees with them. Recently, I've listened to the discussion regarding taxes on marijuana sales. All cities in the county with marijuana businesses do have taxes on them. that often go into the general fund and/or designated for prevention for youth under 25 or law enforcement, minor decoy operations, and/or annual city code enforcement check on the correct labeling of marijuana products. An annual city code enforcement check on the correct labeling of marijuana products could be very important since the State Department of Cannabis Control, the DCC, does no enforcement at all. The DCC made it clear in a recent webinar for parents, teachers, and others who work with youth that they have absolutely no resources to do that because the positions within the department haven't been filled. I respectfully suggest the City Council bring a discussion regarding a marijuana tax for the November ballot to a future agenda. I know it would be very welcome to parents, educators, and others who work on the behalf of youth. It is a beginning to recognizing that the real cost of marijuana consumption to young adults, families, and neighborhoods in society in general. The costs are extremely high in mental health costs alone, which is becoming more clear with each new study and which parents in this city could describe to you in heartbreaking detail. I thank you for your consideration and the opportunity to support to you, your support for this on this subject matter.
It's coming next month. We'll have that discussion in April, I believe.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor Blake-Spear and City Council members. I am a middle school teacher who has spoken here before regarding what we see with our students' mental health needs. At the City Council meeting in January, I shared the U.S. Surgeon General Vivek H. Murthy's public health advisory on the mental health challenges confronting our youth. This was a rare warning and call to action to address what he called an emerging crisis exacerbated by pandemic hardships. Symptoms of youth depression and anxiety have doubled during the pandemic, with 25% of youth experiencing depressive symptoms and 20% experiencing anxiety symptoms, according to Murthy's 53-page advisory. Then in February, the Senate held an all-day hearing regarding children's mental health, where Surgeon Murthy answered senators' questions, one of which was his thoughts on the contribution of marijuana use to poor mental health. He replied, "When it comes to youth, I worry that there is a perception that marijuana is harmless in children. Our data tells us otherwise. Our data tells us that a significant portion of youth who use marijuana will develop a clinical addiction to marijuana. And with underlying mental health conditions, the numbers are even more substantial." The Surgeon General calls on those who surround young people and shape their day-to-day lives, schools, healthcare systems, media, and government. Regarding government, the city's marijuana storefronts can have an unfortunate impact on children by promoting and normalizing marijuana use as a solution for stress and anxiety. Besides parents, educators are on the front lines of these mental health issues. We recognize it will be imperative that the city have robust code enforcement oversight procedures in place for marijuana businesses so that any damage related to marijuana sales, diversion, and promotion may be mitigated sooner rather than later after damage is already done. Thank you so much for your consideration.
Tim Bratton will be followed by Mona Angel and then Christine Schindler.
Good evening, City Council. I wanted to provide an update on the community support for the Encinitas Train Horn Quiet Zone initiative. There are about 100 of us now, and some of which are really suffering, and we are very excited to help move this project forward. Since I last spoke at this council, we now have a website, a Facebook group, and a Nextdoor group. And I've also met with Lillian Doherty, and was excited to learn that the Train Horn Quiet Zone project is on the capital improvement list, but sadly it's only Tier 3, which means it's not funded yet. So we're requesting that the city move the Train Horn Quiet Zone to Tier 1 on the capital improvement list. Thank you.
Mona Angel. Mona's followed by Christine Schindler, and then Randall Sims.
Good evening, Mayor Blakespeare and fellow city council members. I live in Cardiff by the Sea, and I am an active cyclist. Some of you may already know that. I'm here tonight to request action to help promote putting in place improved infrastructure so that I'm able to ride my bicycle safely and not feel in harm's way when trying to commute to the beach or to downtown Cardiff. I would like to see the complete street movement safer for all types of mobility. And I'd like to be able to walk to my synagogue, which is right on Manchester Avenue. I'd like to be able to ride my bicycle into along El Camino Real, and I'm not able to safely do that at this time. So I believe that that there could be consideration to put in place perhaps and less costly improvements at this time that would allow myself and other cyclists to feel safe, as well as senior citizens walking along the El Camino Real juncture. I am a commissioner on the Senior Citizen Council, and I'm very concerned about seniors that want to be mobile and walk along that corridor. Presently, I don't believe it's as safe as it could be. So I respectfully request that consideration be given to what can be done expeditiously at a low cost to the city to improve that. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Christine Schindler, East Encinitas. So to kind of echo, we didn't plan this, but to echo what Mona was talking about, I wanted to come here tonight again to talk about El Camino Real and Manchester, realizing that with the NCC build, we're going to have a lot more traffic on that corridor, walking and biking. And so we're wanting, when the CIP meeting comes along, we're wanting to see some funding for quick build, some immediate changes that can be made to that corridor to make it a little bit more dedicated to bike riders as well as motorists, and some quicker improvements that can be made right away to increase the safety, with some bigger projects to come down the road. And then I also wanted to put in my 2 cents during the CIP to put in some money for non-infrastructure. So I say this all the time, so sorry, I'm a broken record, but so that we have money in the budget for education encouragement when it comes to active transportation and trying to shift everyone out of their cars, and occasionally, not all the time, but having better mobility options and doing public awareness campaigns and public safety campaigns and additional education in the schools to encourage people to use all their mobility options. And I think that's it. I just want to thank you for your service, and I appreciate all that has been done during these last 2 years, all the challenges that have come with COVID. I think you've done a very good job, and you have had a lot of guidance and restrictions as to what you could decide to do, and I don't personally think that any apology is needed. So I thank you for your service.
Next is Randall Sims, followed by Natalie Satoon, and then Rachel Graves.
Good evening, City Council. Funny story, first of all, I was actually attended those meetings about 2 years ago when the redistricting was initially being done. For a second there, I thought that y'all were still debating it, but that is probably why I'm an arts commissioner. I've been an arts commissioner, not a planning commissioner. So anyway, good evening. Thank you in advance for your time here. My name is Randall Sims. I have the honor of knowing most of you from my participation as a citizen, both through my duties in the past as a city commissioner, as well as through my advocacy for the licensing and regulation of legal cannabis in Encinitas since 2016, the old Dram and Eckert days, if you will. It's fantastic to see Encinitas creating a legislative framework for legal cannabis businesses to operate in the city, as this will pull cannabis out of the black market, keep it away from the youth, and instead the product will be distributed into stores that provide a tested, state-approved, and legal product to consumers over 21 years old. Up to this point, you have heard a considerable amount of speech from the minority who oppose legalization in general. But now that legislation has been passed, I think it's important to consider speech from cannabis industry experts. I'm a co-founder and chief operating officer of one of the largest licensed cannabis distributors in the state. My company does last mile delivery to over 500 licensed cannabis dispensaries across the state. I've extensive experience with retail cannabis, and I've seen firsthand how legalizing the medicine in cannabis has reduced mental and physical health problems across the state. It's critical to know that the tax framework created for these Encinitas retail cannabis groups will determine in large part the success Measure H has in getting cannabis off the black market. And it's important to understand that at the point the product arrives at these dispensaries, it has already been taxed a minimum of 28% of the retail value. This includes a 15% excise tax, a cultivation tax, and in Encinitas, an almost 8% sales tax. Now, sales tax is collected by the CDTFA, which is a state entity, but Encinitas receives a portion of that tax. So that 28% tax exists before any business tax that this council decides to impose on the retail sales of the cannabis here in the city. So if you decide to impose, say, a 7% tax, 28% plus 7% means that's 35% extra that consumers have to pay in order to purchase their product at a legal dispensary in Encinitas. I believe consumers will, unfortunately, not want to pay this extra tax if they have the option to purchase it illicitly. There's a lot of, evidence that we've seen in the last 3 years that points to this. As you know, the people of the city passed Proposition 64 by the largest margin of any city in San Diego County because they want to keep cannabis off the streets and out of schools and put it in a legal sales framework. In order to do this, taxes need to be kept as low as possible in order to compel residents and tourists to buy legally. Encinitas is a city with a considerable treasury. The city doesn't need taxes as much as we need an affordable legal option to purchase cannabis and keep it out of the streets and away from kids. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Have a wonderful night.
I have an exhibit. Natalie?
Hello. This is the fourth time this issue has been brought forth and met with silence. This is a screenshot, just one of many, from your Equity Committee member, Mally Woods-Drake. In several online instances, Mally has publicly stated that she resided in Encinitas since 2014. However, Mally's addresses indicate both Santa Monica and Solana Beach during those years. When collective citizen concern of this discrepancy arose, it led to Mally's assertions that I harass and stalk her. As if taxpayers do not have the right to question the merit of a person making recommendations concerning taxpayer dollars. Considering Mally is a member of the City of Encinitas committee, which Mayor Blakespear, you personally appointed her to, residents deserve transparency with Mally making recommendations about how our city government is run and how taxpayer dollars are spent. As a committee member, on more than one committee, Mally has been deceptive and dishonest about her length of residency, which led to her being questioned. It was by her own hand this evolved. Mally Woods-Drake's manic, inflammatory, and derogatory statements as a committee member are a direct reflection of you, Mayor Blakespear, and the entirety of this council. This speaks volumes of your character, Councilman Kranz, as you defended Mally's revolting behavior as she grossly insulted so very many longtime Encinitas residents, the very ones who shaped the vibe of Encinitas, which drew this divisive person here. Mally brings this on herself with her caustic and reprehensible language. Mayor Blakespear, we all know your sole purpose of appointing Mally was to secure the SEIU endorsement for your Senate seat bid. This degree of community upset, all at the expense of advancing your own personal agenda. I find it shocking that you, Councilman Kranz, Councilman Hensy, or you, Mayor Blakespear, have not reached out to the many residents who have expressed concerns about Molly, and that you have not demanded she apologize and retract her words. For the record, I have never stalked or harassed anyone, including Molly. Molly's comments defaming me as a stalker will not be disregarded. This council must be more scrupulous of the appointments to committees and commissions it makes, as some of the most unprofessional appointments have been made and confirmed by this council. Do better. Encinitas residents, demand your council members hear you. You deserve to be respected by all members of the city council and the members of committees and commissions. Thank you.
Final speaker is Rachel Graves.
Natalie stole my sentiments. Rachel Graves. How many Encinitans feel like this council cares about them? I'm going to guess very few. But I'm here to ask, do you care about us? You approve homeless parking lots abutting schools. You entertain housing projects that will bottleneck high-risk fire zones. You spend our money on pet projects before the money is even there to spend. You've counted the homeless. But what have you done to get drug addicts off our beaches, our parks, my brother's memorial bench? Nothing. Crime is on the rise, and you've invited more to come every day. I'm just trying to figure out where your priorities are. We know that you enjoy hanging out with ultra-wealthy nonprofit directors. Here, Councilperson Lyons golf carts around with Mr. Farley and Ms. Siddell. Their salaries total upwards of $1 million a year. They work for the nonprofit Leech Tag, who has been given zoning favors by this council while promoting homelessness. Come on, we aren't fools. Encinitas aren't smiling like these three. We're disgusted. But what's not to smile about when you're a politician? You gotta stay cozy with those big donors. Election time is near. Last month, 6 residents from differing areas and backgrounds highlighted a toxic equity committee member who is on a racist rampage to paint this town trashy. What has this council done? To my knowledge, you've ignored every single one of us, even shamed us for our critiques. This duly appointed committee member, Molly Woods Drake, waltzed into Encinitas in 2020 with this is my town, not your town attitude. She didn't arrive and proclaim I love Encinitas because the SEIU doesn't order up positive energy. The union sent their political activists here to disrupt our town, disparage our senior citizens, insult our disabled, and to drive out interracial couples like myself who debunk their desperate myth that Encinitas is a racist town. To throw temper tantrums and accuse my fellow citizens of things I've never seen in 47 years here, to tell us to move and to take our votes with us. Not a peep from any of you. Why is that? Do you support this? We need a council who stands against bullies who have created a racist Encinitas full of NIMBYs. Nobody buys that. Despite the discriminatory comments, Councilperson Hensy and Mayor Blakespear, can you post the next photo? We're seen here buddying up with my town Molly just a week later. How can they resist when she's the rep for one of their strongest supporters? Again, this is our council keeping cozy with big money. You may ignore your constituents, but your actions speak loudly. You care about money in Sacramento. Stand up, Encinitas, watch very closely, and then ask yourself who these people care about. They call us NIMBYs. I prefer the pronoun NIMSY. I don't want cronyism, not in my council.
That concludes oral communications.
Okay, thank you. So now we have item 10B, which is the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. I think some of the comments in public comment were actually directed to this item, so we'll take your feedback on that as well for this item. So I will, with that, hand it over to staff, city manager
That's
staff.
a weird one. I actually typed this in myself, and somebody had to help me upload it. So tonight, thank you, Madam Mayor and members of council. Tonight we are going to take some public comment on the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. The city of Encinitas will receive, and we received a portion of our $8.1 million in federal American Rescue Plan Act monies, and these funds must be expended or committed by December 31st, 2024. There's been a great deal of waiting for this discussion, and it's actually a good thing that we did, because in January, the final rules were released by the Department of Treasury, and it allows cities like Encinitas, who received less than $10 million, to have a little bit more flexibility in the spending of these funds. Tonight, I'm going to ask you to reserve $1 to $1.1 million for our direct COVID-related costs, including overtime in the fire department, our PPE, or personal protection equipment costs, as well as other items such as our COVID testing and masks, et cetera. So, but with this, I would ask you tonight to hear from the public and not make any decisions tonight. You have budget meetings coming up in the next couple of weeks, but rather use this opportunity to hear from the public of where they think our approximately $7 to $7.1 million in undesignated funding be expended. I should say that when this bill first came out, the directive by the federal government was to use it for really big projects. And the reason why they like those really big projects is it gets people back to work. So originally it was water, wastewater, and broadband items that they thought that those funds could be committed to. And I think many cities across the country and the various municipal leagues said, hey, every city's a little bit different and has different needs to use these funds. But that was the original intent, is to use those funds for those types of projects. That being said, I would ask that you allow the public to talk about these dollars and then think about all of the different uses, and we can have a robust discussion during the budget.
Okay, thank you, City Manager, for the City Manager report on that item. It's unusual that we hear so much from you. Okay, so let's, how many public speakers do we have?
We have 5.
Okay, let's go ahead and call them.
All right, the first 3, Rebecca Nussbaum, followed by Molly Woods, and then Naima Woodward.
Good evening, Mayor Blakespear and fellow council members. My name is Rebecca Nussbaum, and I serve as the Chief Program Officer at Community Resource Center. And on behalf of CRC and the folks that we serve, I'm here to request investment of the American Rescue Plan Act funds to support families struggling with the pandemic's public health and economic impacts. Critical and urgent investment is needed in Encinitas to address food insecurity, prevent homelessness, in particular for seniors, and support affordable housing development. The pandemic has exacerbated food and nutrition insecurity, not only nationwide, but in Encinitas and San Diego County. The San Diego Hunger Coalition estimates that approximately 1 in 3 San Diegans are nutrition insecure, and that is an 8% increase from pre-pandemic rates. At CRC, during the first year of the pandemic, we experienced over 30% more visits per hour to our food nutrition center. And access to healthy and nutritious food is essential for any community. Investment in food and nutrition security is needed to support families and children who are living on the brink and having to make choices between food and other essentials. In addition to food as an essential need, housing is critical. Housing is increasingly unaffordable, and that is compounded with the fact that we are currently experiencing and witnessing the greatest inflation in 40 years. This is dramatically impacting Encinitas seniors who are on a fixed income and individuals and families living on the margins, barely making a living wage. An urgent investment is needed to keep our neighbors housed who are just one vehicle repair, one medical bill, or one unexpected cost away from losing their homes. Flexible funding is a proven method to moving upstream to prevent homelessness. In addition, we need funding to support those who are unsheltered so that they can return to housing. Stable housing means making sure that every Encinitan has the opportunity to succeed. And then finally, investment in affordable housing in Encinitas is critical. Encinitas is now deemed a $1 million city, meaning that the average house value has reached $1 million, as I'm sure you're well aware. And that is increasingly out of reach for seniors, for our essential workers, and for individuals and families to continue to call Encinitas a home. Housing at a price that people can afford is essential and common sense. And so in conclusion, I request that you and city staff consider investing in these critical areas of food security, homelessness prevention, and affordable housing. And I implore you to consider the needs of our most at-risk neighbors as you decide how to allocate these resources. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. First and foremost, as we near the 2-year anniversary of the onset of the pandemic, I want to thank you for the work you've done over the last 2 years to make our community's public safety the top priority of the city. As the partner of a first responder and a former representative of frontline hospital workers, the regulations you put in place and the laws you honored to keep our community safe and ease the burden of our frontline workers was essential and gratefully noted. In regards to this agenda item, I'm requesting that you consider investing the coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds into the following buckets. 1, homelessness prevention and support for our existing unhoused who are affected by the emotional, physical, and economic impact of the pandemic and may have become unhoused. In order to do this, I ask that organizations such as the CRC are considered as a top priority in the budgeting of the funds. I also ask that rental support vouchers and funds are made available to our communities most in need. Secondly, I ask that we support mental health through organizations and nonprofits that offer mental health care to our most vulnerable community members who have been affected by financial stresses, lack of connection and isolation, and for those who are suffering from the many areas of impact during the pandemic. Lastly, I ask that the council continue to strive to seek a project and opportunity to create a 100% affordable housing community in Encinitas. Encinitas does have city-owned land that can be utilized for a 100% affordable housing development, and these funds would be best used to support a housing project. I believe that COVID-19 most exacerbated issues and inequities that previously existed in our most vulnerable communities. Our elderly, our children, low-income, communities of color, as well as monolingual speaking communities. Utilizing the SLFR funds to support these communities with rental assistance, utility support, food scarcity is often the difference between being sheltered and unsheltered, hopeful and hopeless, and maintaining safe environments for children. It is far more cost-saving to provide these funds prior to families and individuals becoming displaced and unsheltered. It is also my hope that rather than simply looking at the past and present struggle, that we also take what we have learned during the pandemic to look forward. Forward thinking means looking at possibilities for 100% affordable housing opportunities and setting funds aside for these projects, even if they don't currently present themselves. Some of our heroes during the pandemic are living on the brink of being displaced from Encinitas due to the rising cost of housing and inflation. To maintain our community character, we must maintain our community. This means creating affordable housing for our seniors, college graduates, teachers, frontline essential workers, and our veterans. Please consider using the SLR funds to support our community in these ways. Thank you again for your service and leadership.
Next is Naima Woodward, followed by Bob Kent, and then Rich Reisner.
Well, good evening, Honorable Mayor and council members. My name is Naima Woodward. I live in Encinitas, and I'm the president of Encinitas Friends of the Arts. I'm truly grateful and appreciative of your unanimous vote to dedicate Pacific View as a Center for Innovation through Arts Education. So I'm here this evening to talk about the fund. Given this recent decision and the fact that the site has been empty for so long and we continue to spend money and unhappy neighborhoods, I would like to request and encourage some funds to be allocated toward the revitalization and activation of this site. obviously it would support creating the economic growth for the whole community, creates job, and essentially makes arts education available for everyone, and so many other reasons. I think you're quite familiar with them. I think this project will meet the requirements. It's a vital, equitable, necessary capital investment for our community. And I think it would be about time. Honestly, I've been working on this for 9 years, and it would be just wonderful to see that. And we stand with you, Encinitas Friends of the Arts, and all the other nonprofits. We are here with you to support any programming, fundraising, whatever we can do, so the site can be used by many in the community. So thank you, and I appreciate it.
Good evening. My name is Bob Kent, Encinitas resident, member of Keys for Homes. I respectfully request that you consider investing the coronavirus recovery funds to help individuals and households that are at risk of experiencing homelessness through homelessness prevention, along with the building of more affordable homes. As we work to solve our housing affordability challenges, many lower-income households are still without a strong financial footing and are living one paycheck, one car repair, one medical emergency away from not being able to pay their rent. The COVID-19 pandemic has only exacerbated this situation, with people earning lower incomes, many who are essential service workers, and seniors on a fixed income hit the hardest economically. Further residential evictions may very well increase, as rising rents and a lack of affordable homes are now coupled with broad-based inflation. Increasing costs for gasoline, food, household items, and utilities will only further exacerbate our lower-income households' rent burden, particularly for seniors on a fixed income. In short, these households that are imminently at risk would directly benefit from rental support, utility payments, access to healthy food, and flexible financial assistance, which could be the difference between staying in their homes and or finding stable housing versus experiencing an episode of homelessness. In the end, helping people stay in their homes is stabilizing, it's healthy, it's also more cost efficient, and I just think it's the right thing to do. The root cause of these challenges is a shortage of affordable homes, and we should do our part. So I respectfully request the city commit a portion of the recovery funds to help solve this problem by building a 100% affordable community for our workers and family residents at the very low income level who earn between $15 to $25 an hour, and again for our seniors on a fixed income. These funds will serve to leverage county, state, and federal funds and truly move the needle in building more affordable homes in our community. This is an impactful and generational decision to provide a stable home and a future with opportunity and dignity for our workers, along with our families, with children and seniors. Lastly, our housing affordability challenges require a regional approach. So I encourage the city to collaborate and engage with local and regional service providers, along with the county and neighboring cities, so that these funds can be deployed most effectively. Thank you.
Hello, Honorable Mayor and council members. My name is Rich Reisner. I'm a 35-year resident of Cardiff, and I'm here speaking on behalf of C101 Design Commission, as well as the Cardiff by the Sea Foundation. I've been a resident of Cardiff, like I said, for 35 years. I want the enhancement and beautification as much as possible to go into our local community. I'm here to speak on 4 specific projects that this funding could be used for. One is the Verde Undercrossing, which was part of the Coastal Rail Trail, a vital aspect to get back and forth across the coast. The second is there's a small intersection, a 3-way intersection off of Manchester and El Camino Real. It's become a pinch point for pedestrians and bicyclists. I mean, not El Camino Real, sorry, San Alejo, down by the lagoon. It's an unsafe stopping point where a simple crosswalk could go in to help pedestrians cross at that location. All of Birmingham needs some improvements for safety, as well as bicycle, pedestrian, and vehicular. The road is decaying, as well as the sidewalks are unsatisfactory to all users. And finally, the Harborough Seaside Parkway project that I've been working on for 6 or 7 years. It's the gateway park to the city of Cardiff, and it has the opportunity for a lot of community uses. So with that said, I'm happy to help you spend your money. Thanks.
Rich, do you have a cost estimate for the Harborough Seaside Parkway?
A couple years ago, it was about just under 2 million. And then today, with today's current construction costs, that's probably close to doubled. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Sure.
Mayor, that does conclude public comments.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for coming out and offering your comments on this American Rescue Act. We're eager to hear from you, and we've received emails about it too. So thank you very much for making the time to come out and share your thoughts with us. I'm just going to quickly call on my council members who want to say a few quick words. Councilmember Lyons.
That's my question for Rich.
Oh, okay. Deputy Mayor.
I'll take our time. And Rich, no on Birmingham. No joking. No, we do have designs there, and it's that price has gone up and up and up and up and up. I've always been a proponent, just pave the street, and somehow because I think it needs a pavement, but I think it's a $10 million project to underground and do all that stuff, and so hopefully we move it forward at some point. But I do think so. Thank you for your comments. I just to kind of give a few comments, I think that it makes sense to set aside the $1 million or so for direct COVID expenses that the city has incurred, and I think that the other portion, the $7 million or so of unassigned, I think it would make the most amount of sense, be extremely prudent to take this conversation into our planning session, where we're able to kind of think about holistically what we've invested in so far, what our goals are, and where it makes the most amount of sense to spend this. I will say that I find quite appealing that this money would help individuals that were impacted because of COVID and only exacerbated some of the issues that people have experienced, because of COVID. And there are more and more people that are finding themselves on our streets without a roof over their head, sleeping in their cars, going to some of the churches and getting food because they don't have food. And so I think that, I think it makes sense for us to think about how we can use this money to help some of our neighbors and residents that have been hurting during this COVID, how we can help them. I also think that we should think about how we can further some of the goals that we've already, and investments that we've made. Verde, a great suggestion here. We've invested $1 million or $2 million in that. And same thing with Birmingham we've invested in. Same thing with Rancho Santa Fe Road with the trails. A number of things that we've invested, Pacific View, high on my list. And so we've invested in those. And so hopefully what we do at that planning session is look at also what we think that we can get from the state has a surplus, the federal government has some money coming our way for infrastructure. So with this pot of money, I'd like to look at things that we don't think, like Verde is shovel ready, and it is in the queue for additional funding if it comes available from the federal government. So with those things that are already kind of in the queue and are really shovel ready and could get funding, I think that we should get more information on what those items are, so that potentially we could start to kind of look at some of the things that are not shovel ready, are not in the queue, like Pacific View, and some of the other items. And so again, just dedicate the 1 million to the direct costs. The other portion, let's talk about it at the planning session, but have more information about what we think could potentially be funded through some of the other federal programs that are coming our way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Kranz.
Yes, thank you. And I think to Deputy Mayor Mosca's point about shovel-ready projects, for example, Verde is never going to, be. It's very unlikely that there would be a grant that would be pay for the whole thing. So having the resources to match to get something constructed, I think, is pretty important. I think it's a strategy that Sandag has used very effectively, where they have leveraged their dollar for every $1 that in Transnet money that gets spent. I think it's $2 that they get from the federal and the state government or something to that effect. So maybe there's a way that we can use these resources to take advantage of something similar. Encinitas has never had a shortage of capital projects on the list that we didn't have the resources to construct. So, I think that it's important to acknowledge the competing needs from community to community, but even this amount of money is not going to hardly put a dent in that list, unfortunately. So there is that. I do tend to agree that figuring out a way to provide the relief that some folks who are on the verge of homelessness, if there is a voucher program that we could implement out of these resources, that I think would be something that I could support. The other thing I'd be very interested in doing, I know that the goal of the council has always been to have a city project that was 100% affordable with city land, et cetera. But we have several projects that are in the pipeline that are going to be in construction fairly soon, that maybe there's a way that we can work with the developers to figure out how to use these resources to buy up the number of affordable units that were deed restricted in those projects, because that is by far the quickest way to having units available for the people that need them. So, but there are no shortage of projects. One of the purposes of the infrastructure bill that is coming up relates to stormwater and water quality issues that I think it would be good to have resources to match the federal money that's going to come from those sort of, grants that are going to be coming from the federal government in the infrastructure bill as well. So anyhow, and I think that, the notion of the color of money, I think is important. I believe that the city manager mentioned that this money needs to be spent by 2024, I believe you said? 2024. So maybe there's a way that we can use this money and meet that requirement, and then some general fund money or some other could be shifted so that we didn't have that deadline hanging over our heads. We could have some more flexibility with how we went about this.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Lyons.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate the input tonight. I think it's all really valuable input and expresses where some of our biggest needs are in our community. Whether we're able to fund through this one source, I think is uncertain at this point, and we'll talk about it more in the future. But it's good to, even if things cannot get funded here, it's good to know what the concerns are and look for other ways to either leverage it for matching funds or get money elsewhere. So I always like the budgeting season because you get to put your money where your mouth is. And I think really how we budget needs to follow where our biggest priorities are. I like hearing about the affordable housing and all the great ideas around that. Both affordable housing and Pacific View are two things we're talking a lot about, but we don't have funds behind yet. So I think there's a need there. So I just like the idea of, well, if we're talking a lot about it, it's really important to us. We've got to find the funding for it. However, both those types of projects might be able to access other money in the future as well. So we want to think about the opportunities for affordable housing and Pacific View to access other money, but we do need to have our own skin in the game I want to go back to something our city manager said about getting people back to work, and that's the objective of this money, and I respect that and I appreciate that. And so, that kind of goes to the traditional view of shovel-ready and what do we have that we're ready to rock and roll with and get things done. So I think the perspective of Verde and some of the other projects that we've invested millions of dollars in to get shovel-ready, I mean, they could be ready to go too. So I think it's going to be a hard decision, but we appreciate your input, and I think a good way to look at it is through the lens of what's really important to us and how can we leverage the money to kind of make the most of it in the long run.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Hinsey.
Thanks. So long list of priorities here, and I think that this money that is coming to us pretty soon is perfect timing to make good on our commitment to Pacific View. We have really up-to-date cost expectations that we can actually execute this project. In a lot of ways, it feels shovel-ready to me because we know what the scope of the project is. And, it's sitting there kind of draining our resources and not doing as much for our community as it could if we make this one big one-time investment. So, it's going to bring jobs, it'll bring visitors to downtown Encinitas, and it supports our community, a lot of whom are artists and makers and educators. So I see it as an investment that will have a return on investment, bringing more people, more activity, being an economic driver in the kind of way that Encinitas supports. So that would be my top priority for the ARPA funding. Infrastructure is, it's something that we must do, and I think that there is a lot of support, as Councilmember Kranz mentioned, through our county agencies, state agencies, federal agencies, and also the opportunity for us to create a local funding measure, which I think we're on the verge of discussing. And so to me, that seems like, stormwater and all of the infrastructure requests that we all get and will never be able to accomplish with our, current forecasts. We need to do all of that, but I just don't think that this is the right opportunity to do with this money. The last priority that I hope we can put some money towards is housing. We spend so much time talking about it. We spend so much time strategizing for it. I think it would just take we don't have any shovel-ready projects right now, so allocating millions of dollars to the 100% affordable project to me just doesn't seem like the right time to do it because there's still so much planning that needs to be done. And so to me, anything that we can do that pushes the planning process forward in a way that's timely would be a good use of funds too. And lastly, Deputy Mayor Mosca and I made a visit to the safe parking program this morning with some of our partners at the school districts, and we were reminded of this fact about Encinitas that most of our folks who are experiencing homeless and taking advantage of that program are seniors. And so recently there's been a lot of new data uncovered about seniors who experience homelessness after one setback, and the gap that is average for them to be able to stay in a house and be able to pay their rent is just $300. And so for us to figure out a way to create some homeless prevention in terms of focusing that on our seniors and rental assistance for our seniors would be just a little bit of money that I think could do a lot of good in the community. So those are my priorities. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate my colleagues sharing their thoughts. I'm going to withhold sharing of priorities until I see the entire budget. So I'll wait till we get to that next time. But I appreciate taking all the public comment, and thank you for your interest in it. So we're going to end this item and almost end this council meeting. Yes.
So I just want to circle back just in terms of the budget, kind of what the next steps are. So you will have a formal strategic planning session on Monday, the 21st of March. That is not the budget strategic planning session that we usually talk about with regard to capital. And I want to make that clear so that if people are interested in coming to different meetings, your first budget meeting on the operating and capital budget will be 2 days later, an early start on Wednesday, March 23rd. So I knew our finance director was going to be really irritated with me if I didn't make that distinction. So, yeah.
That's very good to know. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so let's move on to any other thing that's on this agenda. So we have no informational items. Councilmember initiated items, no. Councilmember reports pursuant to AB 1234. Councilmember Kranz, anything to share? You any Del Mar fencing plan to share? Coastal Commission?
Yeah, we don't want to hear that.
Yeah, a lot of it has been reported pretty well in the Union Tribune over the last couple of weeks, but basically we didn't come to the agreement that we had hoped with the city of Del Mar. So discussions continue, and we're waiting for the Surface Transportation Board to weigh in on, whether or not NCTD needs a CDP to move forward with the fencing. So, did I miss anything?
Only that the CP, or the Surface Transportation Board, did weigh in on the city of Encinitas in 2003 or whatever it is. So the handwriting is on the wall, but we'll see what happens after that decision is handed down.
And just as a reminder, so what he's referring to is when the mayor of the city of Encinitas at that time threatened to chain herself to the tracks if they were double tracked through Cardiff. And I know. And so NCTD had to take this question of double tracking all the way to this federal board. And the federal board said the locals don't have the right to stop a double tracking.
Right, and they sued, city of Encinitas sued under CEQA and was requiring that there be an analysis under CEQA, and that was the question that was presented to the Surface Transportation Board, and it was a slam dunk. And so similar arguments are being made in Del Mar that, environmental assessment and, essentially, and I'm not arguing that this is good, but railroads were given a lot of power. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're so uneventful these days. Nobody's making threats like that.
I did see the general manager's very strongly worded email to somebody that had emailed. I noticed that we get a number of emails, but he responded to one.
Yeah, it's
one
helpful.
of those 85 people on that thread?
Yes, I am. Yeah, it clogs up my phone.
Yeah. The only other thing I would report with NCTD is that they're moving forward pretty aggressively with some of these transit-oriented developments in cities like Carlsbad. I think Oceanside's the furthest one along. But yeah, it's promising. A lot of affordable housing could be from land that's held publicly.
Yeah, that is great. Okay, Councilmember Lyons? No? Okay, let's go. Okay, I'll just share that one of the exciting projects that Sandag's doing is that Build NCC project, which is coming through our city. And the bridge under the San Elijo Lagoon is nearly done. And some people are walking on it, actually unauthorized walking on it, but they report extreme excitement about how great it is. And no, but it connects us to the lagoon on that other side, and it's really exciting. So I can't wait for that to actually open officially.
One other NCC note, the carpool lane northbound is now open. The interesting thing is that there really is not a whole lot of space within Encinitas to get into. It's right on Santa Fe. The bridge is the only area that you can get into the carpool lane going northbound. And any Encinitas off-ramps, you have to get, in the northbound lane, you have to get off at the Loma Santa Fe Drive. So I had an exchange with Alan Kossop, and a resident had asked that question, and that it is going to be fairly limited northbound. That same Santa Fe entrance, so getting on at Encinitas Boulevard or Lucchese Boulevard, you'll be able to get in, but out.
What was the explanation of why it's so important to limit in and out of the carpool lane?
Because it creates conflict that slows traffic down. You have merging actions that, that's what the auxiliary lanes are about, is to let people get up to speed before they're coming on. That's what causes traffic backups. So
It's a technical term called weaving and merging.
Right.
It is actually.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that is frustrating.
Yeah.
That our city is basically blocked from utilizing it.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. City manager report. City attorney report. City clerk report. Assistant city clerk report. Okay. Well, we are adjourned.